Welcome, friend, to this gentle journey through the sands of time, where ancient voices whisper stories that have waited thousands of years to be told. Tonight, we're going to drift along the life-giving waters of the Nile, through dynasties that rose and fell like the river's annual floods, through the lives of pharaohs and farmers, priests and pyramid builders who shaped one of humanity's greatest civilizations. Whether you're settling in for the night or simply seeking to slow the pace of your evening, I'm grateful you're here with me on this peaceful voyage through ancient Egypt's remarkable story. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight, what time it is in your corner of the world, and what draws you to these ancient tales. There's something magical about how history can connect us across continents and centuries, bringing strangers together in the quiet contemplation of our shared human story. If this kind of gentle historical storytelling brings you comfort, consider joining our community of fellow travelers through time. What I'm about to share with you isn't some romanticized Hollywood version of ancient Egypt. This is the real story, built from hieroglyphic inscriptions carved into temple walls, from papyrus documents that survived in desert tombs, from the careful work of archaeologists who've spent lifetimes piecing together fragments of a civilization that flourished for over 3 millennia. These weren't just distant figures in golden masks and flowing robes. They were real people who loved and laughed, who worried about their children's futures, who gazed up at the same stars we see tonight and wondered about their place in the cosmos. Have you ever considered how a civilization could maintain its core identity for longer than the entire span of recorded Western history? The answer lies in the gentle rhythm of the Nile, in the profound wisdom of a people who understood that permanence and change could dance together in perfect harmony. What you're about to discover will transform how you think about human achievement, about the delicate balance between tradition and innovation, and about the timeless struggles that connect us to our ancestors across the vast expanse of time. By the end of our journey together, you'll understand how a collection of farming communities along a river became the world's first great nation, how they developed systems of government, religion, and culture that would influence every civilization that followed, and how their story continues to shape our world today. But before we walk among the pharaohs and their people, let me paint you a picture of the stage where this magnificent drama unfolded. Imagine, if you will, a ribbon of green cutting through an endless sea of golden sand. The ancient Greeks called Egypt the gift of the Nile, and nowhere is this more apparent than when you see the country from above. The contrast is startling and beautiful. On one side, fertile fields stretch as far as the eye can see, dotted with palm trees and bustling villages. Step just a few hundred meters away from the river's influence, and you find yourself in one of Earth's most unforgiving deserts, where the sun beats down mercilessly and water becomes more precious than gold. This geographical reality shaped every aspect of Egyptian civilization. The Nile wasn't just their highway and their source of water, it was their calendar, their god, their promise of tomorrow. Every summer, as regular as clockwork, the great river would begin to swell with waters from the distant highlands of Ethiopia. By late July, the flood would arrive in southern Egypt, carrying with it rich black soil that had been eroding from African mountains for thousands of miles upstream. The Egyptians didn't fight this annual inundation. Instead, they embraced it, planned around it, celebrated it. They developed one of humanity's first sophisticated calendar systems based on the flood's arrival, dividing their year into 3 seasons that reflected the river's rhythm. Akhet, the season of inundation, when the waters covered the land and farmers waited patiently for the flood to recede. Pere, the season of emergence, when the rich soil was revealed and crops were planted in the fertile mud. Shemu, the season of harvest, when communities came together to gather the grain that would sustain them through another year. But this gift came with a price. The desert that surrounded their green oasis was both protector and prison. Those harsh sands kept invading armies at bay for centuries, giving Egyptian civilization time to develop and flourish in relative peace. Yet the same barriers that protected them also isolated them, creating a worldview that would profoundly influence their art, their religion, and their understanding of life and death. The earliest Egyptians, living in scattered settlements along the Nile's banks around 5000 BCE, were not so different from farming communities anywhere in the world. They grew wheat and barley, raised cattle and goats, made pottery and simple tools. What made them extraordinary was their response to the unique challenges and opportunities of their environment. Over centuries, these separate communities began to coalesce into larger political units, driven by the need to coordinate irrigation systems and manage the complex logistics of flood season agriculture. The process wasn't smooth or immediate. For over 1,000 years, what we now call Egypt was actually two distinct kingdoms. Upper Egypt, stretching from the first cataract at Aswan northward to just south of modern Cairo, was a long, narrow strip of civilization bounded by desert cliffs. Lower Egypt encompassed the broad delta where the Nile spreads into multiple channels before emptying into the Mediterranean Sea. These two lands had different cultures, different gods, different ways of organizing society. Upper Egypt was more conservative, more tied to ancient traditions. Lower Egypt was more cosmopolitan, influenced by trade connections with neighboring civilizations. The tension between these two kingdoms would define Egyptian politics for generations. Even after they were unified, pharaohs would always bear the title King of Upper and Lower Egypt, wearing crowns that symbolically combined the white crown of the south with the red crown of the north. This duality became woven into the fabric of Egyptian thought, creating a civilization that saw balance and harmony not as static states, but as dynamic tensions that required constant attention and careful management. Around 3100 BCE, a king whose name has come down to us as Nama, though he may have been called Menes, accomplished what no one had done before. Through a combination of military conquest, diplomatic marriage, and administrative brilliance, he united the two lands into a single kingdom that would endure for over 3,000 years. The Nama palette, a ceremonial stone carving discovered by archaeologists, shows this momentous achievement in symbolic form. On one side, the king wears the white crown of Upper Egypt as he strikes down an enemy. On the other, he wears the red crown of Lower Egypt as he reviews the decapitated bodies of his defeated foes. This wasn't just political unification. It was the birth of the world's first nation-state, complete with a centralized government, a professional bureaucracy, and a sophisticated understanding of how to manage resources across vast distances. Nama established his capital at Memphis, strategically located where Upper and Lower Egypt met. And from there began the monumental task of creating systems that could govern a territory stretching over 600 miles from north to south. The early dynastic period that followed Nama's unification was a time of rapid innovation and experimentation. These early pharaohs were learning how to be kings of a unified nation, developing the protocols and institutions that would define Egyptian monarchy for millennia. They established the principle of divine kingship, positioning the pharaoh as not just a political leader, but as a living god, the earthly embodiment of Horus, the falcon deity who soared between heaven and earth. This wasn't mere political theatre. The concept of divine kingship solved practical problems that faced any ruler trying to govern a large territory with limited communication technology. If the pharaoh was a god, then his word carried absolute authority even in distant provinces where his physical presence couldn't be felt. Local governors became not just administrators, but priests in service to a divine ruler, bound by religious as well as political obligations. The early pharaohs also began developing the elaborate burial practices that would become one of Egypt's most distinctive features. These weren't expressions of morbid obsession with death, but rather sophisticated attempts to ensure continuity of leadership and divine protection for the entire kingdom. If the pharaoh was truly a god, then his death posed a cosmic crisis that threatened the very foundations of Egyptian society. The solution was to develop burial practices that didn't just preserve the king's body, but actually facilitated his transformation into a fully divine being who could continue protecting Egypt from the afterlife. The mastaba tombs of these early rulers were impressive structures, rectangular monuments with sloping sides that rose above the desert floor like artificial hills. But they were just the beginning of an architectural tradition that would culminate in the Great Pyramids. Each generation of tomb builders learned from their predecessors, developing new techniques for cutting and moving massive stone blocks, creating more sophisticated internal chambers, and designing structures that would endure for eternity. During this formative period, Egyptian craftsmen also developed the distinctive artistic style that would remain remarkably consistent for thousands of years. This wasn't primitive art that would later evolve into something more sophisticated. It was a fully mature visual language designed to serve specific religious and political purposes. Egyptian art wasn't meant to be realistic in the way we understand the term. Instead, it was conceptual, showing not how things looked at a particular moment, but how they existed in their essential eternal forms. The famous profile view of Egyptian figures, with the head in profile but the shoulders shown frontally, wasn't the result of limited artistic skill. It was a deliberate choice that allowed artists to show the most recognizable and permanent aspects of their subjects. A profile clearly identified an individual's unique features, while the frontal view of shoulders conveyed strength and authority. The combination created images that were meant to be readable and meaningful for eternity, not just beautiful for a moment. The hieroglyphic writing system that emerged during this period reflected the same sophisticated understanding of communication and permanence. Unlike alphabetic writing systems that represent sounds, hieroglyphs combined phonetic elements with ideographic symbols that conveyed meaning directly. This made Egyptian writing incredibly flexible and expressive, capable of recording everything from simple business transactions to complex theological concepts. More importantly for our story, it created a literary tradition that preserved Egyptian voices across thousands of years. The scribes who mastered this complex writing system became the backbone of Egyptian administration. In a largely illiterate society, the ability to read and write granted enormous power and prestige. Scribal schools attached to temples and government offices trained young men in not just writing, but in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and law. These educated administrators made it possible for pharaohs to govern effectively across vast distances, creating a bureaucratic system that was both centralized and responsive to local conditions. As the early dynastic period gave way to what historians call the Old Kingdom around 2686 BCE, all these innovations began to coalesce into something unprecedented in human history. Egypt had become not just a unified nation, but a civilization in the truest sense of the word. They had developed systems of government, religion, art, and learning that worked together to create a stable, prosperous society that could undertake projects of staggering ambition and complexity. The pharaohs of the Third Dynasty began experimenting with new forms of royal architecture that would revolutionize construction techniques and create monuments that still inspire awe today. Djoser, who ruled around 2670 BCE, commissioned his architect Imhotep to design something completely new for his eternal resting place. Instead of building a single large mastaba, they created a series of progressively smaller mastabas stacked on top of each other, creating the first step pyramid. This architectural innovation at Saqqara wasn't just about creating something visually impressive. It represented a fundamental shift in how Egyptians thought about the relationship between earth and heaven, between the temporal world of the living and the eternal realm of the gods. The step pyramid rose in 6 distinct tiers, each one bringing the pharaoh's burial chamber closer to the sky where he would join the sun god Ra in his daily journey across the heavens. Imhotep, whose name means "he who comes in peace," was far more than an architect. He was a polymath whose innovations extended into medicine, astronomy, and engineering. Later generations would deify him, recognizing that his contributions had fundamentally changed what was possible in human achievement. The step pyramid complex he designed included not just the main monument, but an entire city of the dead, complete with courtyards for eternal festivals, chapels for ongoing worship, and storage facilities for the provisions the pharaoh would need in the afterlife. The construction of this monument required organizational skills that rival those of any modern corporation. Thousands of workers had to be fed, housed, and coordinated. Stone had to be quarried from sites dozens of miles away, transported along the Nile during flood season, when the river could carry the heaviest loads, then dragged across desert and up ramps using techniques that engineers still debate today. The precision required was extraordinary. The base of the pyramid had to be perfectly level, the angles precisely calculated, the internal chambers aligned with astronomical phenomena that would occur decades or centuries in the future. What's most remarkable about this achievement is that it wasn't the work of slaves laboring under brutal conditions, as Hollywood would have us believe. Recent archaeological discoveries have revealed workers' villages near the pyramid sites, complete with breweries, bakeries, and medical facilities that provided better healthcare than most people received in the ancient world. These were skilled craftsmen, seasonal laborers who worked on the pyramids during the flood season when agricultural work was impossible, and specialists who dedicated their entire careers to perfecting the techniques of monumental construction. The workers took pride in their achievements, carving graffiti into the pyramid stones that boasted about their team's accomplishments. The Drunkards of Menkaure was the name one crew gave themselves, while another called themselves Friends of Khufu. These weren't the desperate scratchings of oppressed slaves, but the confident signatures of professionals who knew they were participating in something magnificent and eternal. The success of Djoser's step pyramid inspired his successors to attempt even more ambitious projects. Sneferu, the first pharaoh of the 4th dynasty, built not one but 3 pyramids during his 30-year reign, each one representing a step forward in architectural sophistication. His bent pyramid at Dashur shows the experimental nature of pyramid building during this period. The architects began with a steep angle of 54 degrees, but halfway through construction, they changed the angle to 43 degrees, creating the distinctive bent appearance that gives the monument its modern name. This change wasn't a sign of failure or incompetence. It was evidence of engineers learning in real time, adapting their designs as they gained experience with the immense stresses involved in pyramid construction. The bent pyramid taught them lessons about weight distribution and structural stability that would prove crucial for their next project, the Red Pyramid, which became the first true pyramid with smooth, straight sides from base to apex. Sneferu's son Khufu took these accumulated innovations and created what remains one of the most impressive monuments in human history. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built around 2580 BCE, was the tallest structure on Earth for over 3,700 years. Its base covers 13 acres, and it contains approximately 2.5 million stone blocks, each weighing between 2 and 15 tons. The precision of its construction is breathtaking. The base is level to within just 2.5 centimeters across its entire extent, and the sides are aligned to the cardinal directions with an accuracy of less than 1/10 of a degree. But the Great Pyramid wasn't built in isolation. It was the centerpiece of a vast complex that included smaller pyramids for queens, mastaba tombs for nobles and high officials, temples for ongoing religious ceremonies, and causeways that connected the monument to the Nile. The entire Giza Plateau became a necropolis, a city of the dead that was designed to function for eternity. The Great Sphinx, carved from a natural outcrop of limestone, stood guardian over this sacred landscape, its human head representing the divine intelligence of the pharaoh, its lion's body symbolizing royal power and strength. The internal chambers of the Great Pyramid reveal the sophisticated understanding of engineering and astronomy that guided its construction. The king's chamber, where Khufu's sarcophagus still rests, is positioned at the pyramid's heart and aligned with stellar phenomena that held deep religious significance for the ancient Egyptians. The narrow shafts that lead from this chamber toward the pyramid's exterior aren't air vents, as was once believed, but astronomical alignments that pointed towards specific stars and constellations that represented different aspects of the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife. The queen's chamber, despite its name, was never intended for Khufu's wife. Instead, it served a ritual purpose connected to the pharaoh's transformation into a divine being. The Grand Gallery, that magnificent ascending corridor with its corbelled ceiling soaring 28 feet above the floor, was designed not just as a passageway, but as an architectural metaphor for the pharaoh's ascent from earthly kingship to cosmic divinity. During the Fourth Dynasty, pyramid building reached its absolute peak with the monuments at Giza. Khafre's pyramid, though smaller than his father's, appears taller because it was built on elevated ground. Its sophisticated internal design includes multiple chambers and passages that reflect continued innovation in pyramid architecture. Menkare's pyramid, the smallest of the three at Giza, demonstrates that even later pharaohs with more limited resources could create monuments of extraordinary beauty and precision. The pyramid builders of the Old Kingdom weren't just creating tombs. They were making profound theological statements about the nature of kingship and the relationship between human beings and the divine. Each pyramid was a machine for resurrection, designed to facilitate the pharaoh's transformation from mortal ruler to eternal God. The pyramid texts, the oldest religious writings in human history, were carved into the walls of later pyramids and describe in detail the journey the pharaoh's soul would take through the afterlife. These texts reveal a sophisticated understanding of death, not as an ending, but as a transformation. The pharaoh didn't simply die and go to heaven. Instead, he underwent a complex process of purification and rebirth that required precise ritual procedures and magical protections. The pyramid served as both the stage for these transformations and the pharaoh's eternal dwelling place from which he could continue to protect and guide Egypt. The society that created these monuments was far more complex and sophisticated than most people realize. The Old Kingdom developed a professional civil service that managed everything from tax collection to flood control across hundreds of miles of territory. Provincial governors, known as nomarchs, ruled the 42 administrative districts called nomes, each with its own local traditions and patron deities, but all united under the pharaoh's divine authority. The economy that supported pyramid building was remarkably sophisticated, based not on money as we understand it, but on a complex system of redistribution that ensured resources flowed efficiently throughout the kingdom. Farmers paid taxes in grain, which was stored in massive government granaries and then redistributed to support craftsmen, soldiers, priests, and administrators. This system created full employment and social stability while generating the enormous surpluses needed for monumental construction projects. Egyptian medicine during the Old Kingdom was far advanced compared to other ancient civilizations. Medical papyri describe surgical procedures, diagnostic techniques, and treatments that demonstrate systematic observation and experimentation. Egyptian physicians could set broken bones, remove cataracts, and perform dental procedures with remarkable skill. They understood that the heart was the center of the circulatory system and had detailed knowledge of human anatomy gained through the mummification process. The religious beliefs that guided Old Kingdom society were equally sophisticated, combining practical ethics with complex theological concepts about the nature of existence. Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice, represented not just abstract moral principles, but practical guidelines for living in harmony with cosmic order. The pharaoh was responsible for maintaining Ma'at throughout his kingdom, ensuring that justice prevailed and that the natural order continued to function properly. This wasn't merely political propaganda designed to maintain royal power. It reflected a genuine belief that human society was part of a larger cosmic system that required constant attention and careful management. When the pharaoh successfully maintained Ma'at, the Nile flooded at the proper time, crops grew abundantly, and Egypt prospered. When Ma'at was violated, chaos and disaster would follow. The art and literature of the Old Kingdom express these beliefs through works of extraordinary beauty and sophistication. The wall paintings in mastaba tombs don't just show scenes from daily life. They create eternal realities where the deceased could continue to enjoy the pleasures and activities they had loved in life. These images were believed to be magically effective, actually providing the dead with food, entertainment, and companionship for eternity. Egyptian literature from this period includes some of humanity's first great works of fiction and philosophy. The Instructions of Ptah-hotep, a wisdom text attributed to a vizier of the 5th dynasty, offers practical advice about how to live successfully and ethically. The Cannibal Hymn, found in pyramid texts, uses shocking imagery to describe the pharaoh's consumption of divine power. These works reveal minds grappling with fundamental questions about power, morality, and the meaning of existence. As the 5th and 6th dynasties unfolded, the golden age of pyramid building gradually gave way to new forms of artistic and intellectual expression that would define Egyptian civilization for centuries to come. The pharaohs of this later Old Kingdom period may not have built monuments quite as massive as the Great Pyramid, but they created something equally remarkable: a literary and artistic tradition that captured the full complexity of human experience within the framework of Egyptian religious belief. The Pyramid of Unas, last pharaoh of the 5th dynasty, marked a revolutionary moment in Egyptian history. For the first time, the interior walls of a royal tomb were covered with hieroglyphic texts, creating what scholars now call the pyramid texts. These weren't simple inscriptions recording the pharaoh's achievements. They were elaborate ritual instructions, magical spells, and theological meditations that provided a detailed map of the afterlife journey awaiting every divine king. Reading these ancient words today, you can almost hear the voices of the priests who first chanted them in the darkness of the pyramid's burial chamber. They speak of the pharaoh joining the imperishable stars, of his transformation into a falcon soaring through celestial realms, of his union with Ra as the sun god's eternal companion. But beneath the religious imagery lies something profoundly human: a civilization's attempt to understand death not as an ending, but as the ultimate adventure. The pyramid texts reveal that Egyptian religious thought was far more complex and nuanced than the simplified versions we often encounter in popular culture. These weren't people who worshipped animals or built monuments out of primitive superstition. They were sophisticated theologians grappling with questions that still challenge us today. How does consciousness survive bodily death? What is the relationship between individual identity and cosmic order? How can finite beings participate in infinite reality? Their answers weren't presented as dogmatic doctrine, but as poetic exploration, using metaphor and symbol to approach mysteries that couldn't be captured in literal language. The pharaoh becomes a star, but also a bird, a bull, a lotus flower emerging from primordial waters. Each image illuminates a different aspect of transformation, creating a rich tapestry of meaning that could accommodate multiple interpretations, while maintaining core truths about the nature of existence. As royal power gradually became more distributed during the later Old Kingdom, provincial nobles began asserting greater independence and creating their own remarkable monuments. The rock-cut tombs at places like Beni Hassan and Deir el-Bersha showcase a flowering of regional artistic styles that maintained Egyptian aesthetic principles while incorporating local innovations and preferences. These weren't pale imitations of royal art, but confident expressions of a mature civilization that could support multiple centers of creativity and patronage. The autobiography of Weni, carved into his tomb at Abydos, provides an intimate glimpse into the life of a high official during the 6th dynasty. His account of leading military expeditions into Nubia and organizing massive construction projects reads like a modern executive's memoir, complete with pride in professional accomplishments and careful attention to bureaucratic detail. But it also reveals the personal relationships that made Egyptian administration function effectively, the bonds of loyalty and trust between pharaoh and servant that transformed official duty into something approaching friendship. During this period, Egyptian influence extended far beyond the Nile Valley, as trade networks carried Egyptian goods and ideas throughout the ancient Mediterranean world. Archaeologists have discovered Egyptian artifacts in Syria, Palestine, and even distant Mesopotamia, while foreign materials like cedarwood from Lebanon and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan found their way into Egyptian tombs and temples. This wasn't conquest in the military sense, but cultural influence that spread through commercial relationships and diplomatic exchanges. The Egyptians developed sophisticated techniques for working with imported materials, learning to combine foreign elements with traditional Egyptian designs in ways that enhanced both. The gold jewelry found in royal burials from this period demonstrates technical mastery that wouldn't be equaled for thousands of years. These craftsmen could create wire so fine it was almost invisible, could inlay precious stones with microscopic precision, and could fashion complex mechanisms that allowed jewelry to move and sparkle with the wearer's every gesture. Egyptian furniture makers during the Old Kingdom created pieces that combined practical function with symbolic meaning in ways that transformed everyday objects into works of art. The golden throne of Tutankhamun, though from a much later period, represents the culmination of traditions that began during these early dynasties. Every element of design, from the choice of materials to the arrangement of decorative motifs, conveyed messages about royal power, divine protection, and cosmic harmony. The textiles produced by Egyptian weavers were equally sophisticated, using linen made from flax grown in the Nile Delta to create fabrics of extraordinary fineness and beauty. The best Egyptian linen was so finely woven, it was nearly transparent, prized throughout the ancient world as the ultimate luxury fabric. Egyptian dyers developed techniques for creating colors that remained vivid for millennia, using mineral pigments and vegetable dyes in combinations that produced subtle gradations and complex hues. But perhaps the most remarkable achievement of Old Kingdom civilization was its development of what we might call a middle class, a substantial population of skilled craftsmen, scribes, and administrators who enjoyed comfortable lives and could aspire to modest versions of the luxuries available to the elite. The tombs of these middle-ranking officials reveal households with fine furniture, beautiful clothing, and access to imported goods that would have been unimaginable for ordinary people in most ancient societies. This prosperity wasn't accidental or temporary. It reflected deliberate policies that recognized skilled workers as valuable resources worth investing in and protecting. Egyptian craftsmen served lengthy apprenticeships that transformed them into masters of their trades, capable of innovation and creativity within established traditions. The guild system that emerged during this period provided social security and professional identity while maintaining quality standards that made Egyptian products famous throughout the ancient world. The educational system that supported this skilled workforce was remarkably sophisticated for its time. Temple schools taught not only reading and writing, but mathematics advanced enough to support complex engineering projects, astronomy precise enough to create accurate calendars, and medicine effective enough to treat a wide range of conditions. Egyptian mathematical texts demonstrate understanding of geometric principles that wouldn't be rediscovered in Europe for thousands of years. The Edwin Smith surgical papyrus, though copied during a later period, preserves medical knowledge that originated during the Old Kingdom. Its detailed descriptions of surgical procedures, anatomical observations, and diagnostic techniques reveal physicians who approached their work with scientific methodology and careful attention to empirical evidence. These weren't primitive medicine men relying on magic and superstition, but trained professionals who understood the importance of systematic observation and logical reasoning. Egyptian astronomy during this period achieved remarkable precision in tracking celestial movements and understanding their relationship to earthly events. The calendar they developed, based on careful observation of stellar phenomena combined with the practical necessities of agricultural planning, was so accurate that it remained in use for thousands of years. Their ability to predict eclipses, track planetary movements, and calculate the length of the year to within minutes of modern measurements demonstrates mathematical and observational skills that rival those of much later civilizations. The religious festivals that punctuated Egyptian life during the Old Kingdom weren't merely ceremonial occasions, but complex social and economic events that brought together people from across the kingdom. The Opet Festival, celebrating the annual renewal of royal power, involved elaborate processions, public feasts, and theatrical performances that reinforce social bonds while providing entertainment and spiritual renewal for participants. These festivals created shared experiences that unified diverse populations under common cultural traditions. The role of women in Old Kingdom society was remarkably progressive compared to other ancient civilizations. Egyptian women could own property, conduct business, serve as priestesses, and even rule as pharaohs under certain circumstances. The legal papyri from this period record women buying and selling real estate, managing agricultural estates, and participating in court proceedings as equals to men. This wasn't theoretical equality, but practical reality that shaped daily life for millions of people. Queen Neithotep, wife of the pharaoh Djoser, exercised real political power and was honored with her own elaborate burial complex. Her titles and inscriptions suggest she served as more than just a ceremonial consort, actively participating in governmental decisions and religious ceremonies. The artistic representations of royal women from this period show them as partners rather than subordinates, standing beside their husbands in positions of dignity and authority. The gradual decentralization that marked the end of the Old Kingdom wasn't a sign of civilizational failure, but rather evidence of Egyptian culture's success in creating stable local institutions. Provincial governors who had been appointed by the pharaoh began passing their positions to their sons, creating hereditary dynasties that maintained Egyptian cultural traditions while developing regional variations and innovations. This process laid the groundwork for the cultural renaissance that would follow. The collapse of centralized Old Kingdom authority around 2181 BCE marked the end of an era, but not the end of Egyptian civilization. The achievements of this remarkable period, from the pyramids of Giza to the wisdom literature of the scribes, had created foundations strong enough to support renewal and transformation. The administrative systems, artistic traditions, religious beliefs, and technological innovations developed during these centuries would continue to influence Egyptian society for thousands of years to come. As we prepare to follow the Egyptian story into its next chapter, it's worth pausing to appreciate the extraordinary scope of what had been accomplished during these formative centuries. A collection of farming villages had evolved into a sophisticated nation capable of organizing massive construction projects, supporting diverse populations, maintaining complex trade relationships, and creating works of art and literature that still inspire wonder today. The people who built the pyramids had also built something equally impressive, a civilization that could adapt and endure through whatever challenges lay ahead. The wisdom they developed during this golden age would guide their descendants through periods of chaos and renewal, conquest and liberation, innovation and tradition. Their understanding that permanence and change could coexist, that individual achievement and collective responsibility were both essential, that human beings could participate in cosmic order while maintaining their unique identities, would prove as enduring as the monuments they carved from stone. The wisdom that would emerge from the Old Kingdom's twilight would be tested in ways its creators could never have imagined. As centralized authority weakened and the Great Pyramid Age drew to a close, Egypt entered what historians call the First Intermediate Period, a time of political fragmentation that lasted from roughly 2181 to 2055 BCE. Yet this apparent collapse wasn't the end of Egyptian greatness, but rather its transformation into something more resilient and adaptable. During these uncertain years, local governors, who had once served as the pharaoh's appointed representatives, began asserting independence, creating a patchwork of competing kingdoms along the Nile. The nome system, that had been the backbone of Old Kingdom administration, became the foundation for dozens of small states, each maintaining Egyptian cultural traditions while developing their own distinctive characteristics. Far from destroying Egyptian civilization, this decentralization allowed it to evolve and experiment in ways that would prove crucial for its long-term survival. The provincial courts that emerged during this period became laboratories of innovation, fostering artistic styles and literary forms that would enrich Egyptian culture for centuries to come. The rock-cut tombs at Beni Hassan showcase the confidence of these regional rulers, their walls decorated with scenes of daily life that reveal a society adapting creatively to changing circumstances. These weren't crude imitations of royal art, but sophisticated expressions of Egyptian aesthetic principles applied to new contexts and purposes. One of the most remarkable documents from this period is the Admonitions of Ipuwer, a literary work that describes social upheaval with vivid imagery and emotional power. The text speaks of servants becoming masters, of the poor wearing fine linen while the rich go hungry, of sacred traditions being abandoned and ancient wisdom forgotten. Modern scholars debate whether these descriptions reflect actual historical events or represent literary metaphors for cosmic disorder. But the document's emotional impact is undeniable. What makes the Admonitions particularly fascinating is how it frames social chaos not as random catastrophe, but as the consequence of abandoning Ma'at, the principle of cosmic order that had guided Egyptian society since its earliest days. The author isn't simply lamenting political instability, but calling for renewal of the ethical and spiritual foundations that made Egyptian civilization possible. This wasn't pessimistic despair, but prophetic hope, a vision of restoration that would inspire future generations. The literature of the First Intermediate Period reveals Egyptian intellectuals grappling with questions that remain relevant today. How should individuals respond when established institutions fail? What obligations do people have to each other during times of crisis? Can traditional wisdom provide guidance for unprecedented challenges? The answers they developed weren't simple or dogmatic, but complex and nuanced, acknowledging both human limitations and divine possibilities. The Tale of the Eloquent Peasant, composed during this period, tells the story of a farmer who travels to the capital seeking justice after being robbed by a corrupt official. His speeches before the court combine legal argumentation with poetic eloquence, demonstrating that wisdom and virtue aren't limited to the educated elite, but can emerge from unexpected sources. The story's popularity suggests that Egyptian audiences appreciated its message about individual dignity and moral courage. These literary works weren't created in isolation, but reflected broader social and intellectual developments that were transforming Egyptian society. The democratization of religious beliefs that began during the late Old Kingdom accelerated during the First Intermediate Period, as ordinary people claimed access to afterlife privileges that had previously been reserved for royalty. The coffin texts, magical spells painted inside the wooden coffins of middle-class Egyptians, adapted royal pyramid texts for use by anyone who could afford proper burial preparations. This religious democratization had profound social implications, creating new forms of personal piety and individual responsibility that complemented traditional communal worship. people began commissioning autobiographical inscriptions that emphasized their moral achievements rather than just their official titles or family connections. These texts reveal individuals who saw themselves as personally accountable for maintaining Maihat in their daily lives, not just passive subjects of divine pharaonic authority. The technological innovations that emerged during this period of political fragmentation would prove equally important for Egypt's future development. Provincial workshops, freed from the constraints of royal monopolies, experimented with new techniques for working metal, weaving textiles, and creating pottery. The bronze working technology that would revolutionize Egyptian military capabilities first appeared during these centuries, developed by craftsmen who could respond quickly to local needs and opportunities. Egyptian agriculture also evolved significantly during the First Intermediate Period, as farmers developed new irrigation techniques and crop varieties that increased productivity while reducing dependence on centralized management systems. The Shadouf, a simple but effective lever system for lifting water from canals to fields, allowed individual farmers to expand their cultivated areas without massive state investment in infrastructure. These innovations would prove crucial when centralized government was eventually restored. The trading networks that had connected Egypt to the broader Mediterranean world didn't disappear during this period of political fragmentation, but actually became more diverse and flexible. Local rulers established their own commercial relationships with foreign partners, creating multiple channels for acquiring imported goods and materials. This diversification made Egyptian trade more resilient, while introducing new influences that would enrich Egyptian culture. Archaeological evidence from sites like Heracleopolis and Thebes reveals that some provincial centers actually prospered during the First Intermediate Period, their rulers commissioning impressive monuments and supporting sophisticated cultural activities. The tomb of Anktefi at Mawala includes autobiographical inscriptions that boast of his success in maintaining order and prosperity in his province, despite the surrounding chaos. These local strongmen weren't destructive warlords, but capable administrators who preserved Egyptian civilization at the regional level. The gradual reunification of Egypt that began around 2055 BCE wasn't imposed from outside, but emerged organically from these provincial power centers. The Theban princes, who eventually established the Middle Kingdom, drew on traditions and innovations that had been developing throughout Egypt during the Intermediate Period. Their success resulted not from military conquest alone, but from their ability to synthesize local developments into a renewed national vision. Mentuhotep II, who completed Egyptian reunification around 2055 BCE, faced challenges that were both similar to and different from those confronted by Narmer 1500 years earlier. Like the first unifier, he had to create institutions capable of governing a large territory populated by people with diverse local loyalties. Unlike Narmer, he had to work with provincial elites who had grown accustomed to independence and had developed their own sources of legitimacy and power. The Middle Kingdom that emerged from this reunification process was more decentralized and flexible than its Old Kingdom predecessor, incorporating lessons learned during the Intermediate Period about the importance of local autonomy and regional variation. The pharaohs of the 11th and 12th dynasties ruled not as absolute autocrats, but as coordinators of a complex system that balanced central authority with provincial independence. The literature of the early Middle Kingdom reflects this new understanding of political leadership, emphasizing the pharaoh's role as shepherd of his people rather than distant divine ruler. The instructions for King Merikare, attributed to a pharaoh advising his son and successor, counsels moderation, wisdom, and attention to subjects' welfare. The text acknowledges that royal power depends ultimately on popular support and divine approval, both of which must be earned through virtuous conduct. This more nuanced understanding of kingship was reflected in the architectural projects undertaken by Middle Kingdom pharaohs. While they continued building pyramids, these monuments were smaller and more efficient than their Old Kingdom predecessors, demonstrating that impressive scale wasn't necessary for effective royal symbolism. The pyramid complex of Amenemhat III at Hawara included innovative drainage systems and structural features that showed how Egyptian engineering continued to evolve and improve. The Middle Kingdom also saw remarkable developments in Egyptian art and craftsmanship, as royal workshops combined traditional techniques with innovations developed during the intermediate period. The jewelry found in the tomb of Princess Sithathoryunet demonstrates technical mastery that surpassed even Old Kingdom achievements, using complex wirework and granulation techniques to create pieces of extraordinary delicacy and beauty. The crown of Princess Khanumet incorporates over 700 individual elements assembled with microscopic precision. Egyptian sculpture during the Middle Kingdom achieved new levels of psychological sophistication, moving beyond the idealized representations of earlier periods to explore individual character and emotional expression. The portraits of Senwosret III show a ruler marked by the responsibilities of leadership, his face bearing lines of care and determination that humanize royal authority without diminishing its dignity. These weren't signs of artistic decline, but evidence of growing confidence and maturity in Egyptian aesthetic traditions. The expansion of Egyptian influence during the Middle Kingdom wasn't limited to military conquest, but included cultural exchange and commercial development that enriched both Egyptian society and its neighbors. The trading posts established in Nubia weren't just military outposts, but cultural centers, where Egyptian and African traditions blended to create new forms of artistic expression and religious practice. The fortress at Buhan included temples, workshops, and residential areas that supported a thriving multicultural community. Egyptian expeditions to the mysterious land of Punt, probably located along the Red Sea coast of modern Somalia and Eritrea, brought back exotic goods and knowledge that fascinated Egyptian audiences. The detailed reliefs in Hatshepsut's temple at Deir el-Bahri show Puntiti houses built on stilts, strange animals and plants, and people whose appearance and customs differed dramatically from Egyptian norms. These images weren't just exotic curiosities, but evidence of Egyptian openness to learning from other cultures. The technological achievements of the Middle Kingdom included innovations in metallurgy, mathematics, and medicine that would influence Egyptian civilization for centuries to come. The mathematical papyri from this period demonstrate sophisticated understanding of geometry and algebra, including techniques for calculating areas and volumes that supported complex engineering projects. The Moscow Mathematical Papyrus includes problems involving pyramids and other geometric shapes that show how theoretical mathematics supported practical construction work. Egyptian medicine during the Middle Kingdom built on Old Kingdom foundations, while incorporating new knowledge gained through expanded contact with other civilizations. The Kahun Medical Papyrus, dealing specifically with women's health, demonstrates systematic observation and treatment of gynecological conditions. The text includes both practical remedies and theoretical explanations that show Egyptian physicians developing increasingly sophisticated understanding of human anatomy and physiology. The religious developments of the Middle Kingdom reflected the same balance between tradition and innovation that characterized other aspects of Egyptian society. The cult of Osiris, god of the underworld and resurrection, became increasingly popular among all social classes, offering hope for eternal life to anyone who lived according to Ma'at and received proper burial. This democratization of afterlife beliefs created new forms of personal piety while maintaining connection to ancient theological traditions. The festival calendar that structured Middle Kingdom religious life included both ancient celebrations that connected communities to cosmic cycles and newer observances that reflected contemporary concerns and devotions. The beautiful Festival of the Valley, which brought together living and dead family members in elaborate cemetery celebrations, created opportunities for social bonding, while reinforcing beliefs about continuity between this world and the next. The role of women in Middle Kingdom society built on Old Kingdom precedents while responding to changing social and economic conditions. Queen Nefertiti, who ruled as pharaoh in her own right at the end of the 12th dynasty, demonstrated that female leadership remained an accepted possibility within Egyptian political tradition. Her successful reign paved the way for later female pharaohs while showing how Egyptian flexibility could accommodate exceptional circumstances. The educational system that supported Middle Kingdom administration and culture expanded significantly during this period. As the need for trained personnel grew with increasing governmental complexity, scribal schools attached to temples and administrative centers taught not only technical skills, but also the ethical principles and cultural knowledge necessary for effective leadership. The instructions of Amenemhat I, composed for the education of future officials, emphasizes wisdom, discretion, and loyalty as essential qualities for public service. The international diplomacy of the Middle Kingdom reveals Egyptian rulers who understood their kingdom's place within a broader network of civilizations and who worked actively to maintain beneficial relationships with neighbors and trading partners. The diplomatic correspondence preserved in later archives shows Egyptian pharaohs exchanging gifts with rulers in Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and the Eastern Mediterranean, creating bonds of friendship and mutual respect that supported peaceful commerce and cultural exchange. The gradual decline of Middle Kingdom's central authority during the 13th and 14th dynasties wasn't a sudden collapse, but rather a slow erosion of royal power that allowed provincial elites to reassert independence. This process was complicated by the arrival of new populations from the Levant, people the Egyptians called the Hyksos, who brought different cultural traditions and technological innovations that would ultimately enrich Egyptian civilization. The second intermediate period that followed, roughly from 1650 to 1550 BCE, saw Egypt once again divided into competing kingdoms. But this time, the situation was complicated by foreign rule in the northern regions. The Hyksos kings who established themselves in the Nile Delta weren't brutal conquerors, but capable administrators who adopted Egyptian governmental practices while maintaining their own cultural identities. Their rule introduced new military technologies and diplomatic practices that would prove valuable for Egypt's future development. The horse-drawn chariot, bronze weapons, and composite bow that the Hyksos brought to Egypt revolutionized military capabilities and would be crucial for the imperial expansion that characterized the new kingdom. But these innovations weren't simply imposed on Egyptian society. They were adapted and improved by Egyptian craftsmen who combined foreign techniques with traditional Egyptian approaches to create superior tools and weapons. The cultural exchange that occurred during Hyksos rule enriched Egyptian artistic and literary traditions while maintaining their essential character. Egyptian scribes continued composing wisdom literature and religious texts, but they incorporated new themes and perspectives that reflected the complex realities of living in a multicultural society. The mathematical and astronomical knowledge that entered Egypt during this period enhanced rather than replaced traditional Egyptian scientific understanding. The Theban princes who eventually expelled the Hyksos and reunified Egypt around 1550 BCE weren't simply restoring an earlier political system, but creating something new that incorporated lessons learned during centuries of experimentation and adaptation. The new kingdom that emerged from their efforts would become the most powerful and influential period in Egyptian history, but its achievements built directly on foundations laid during the long process of political fragmentation and cultural development that had characterized the intermediate periods. As we follow the Egyptian story into this new phase of imperial expansion and cultural flowering, we can see how the apparent setbacks and challenges of the intermediate periods had actually strengthened Egyptian civilization by forcing it to become more flexible, creative, and resilient. The pyramid builders of the Old Kingdom had created monuments that would endure for millennia, but their successors had accomplished something equally remarkable. They had created a culture capable of continuous renewal and adaptation while maintaining its essential identity and values. The story of ancient Egypt isn't one of simple rise and decline, but of continuous transformation and regeneration. A civilization that learned to balance stability with change, tradition with innovation, local autonomy with national unity. The lessons they developed during these crucial centuries of challenge and renewal would guide them through the imperial glories and eventual transformations that lay ahead, creating a legacy that would influence human civilization long after the last pharaoh had laid down the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. Crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. The pharaohs who emerged from Thebes to challenge Hyksos' rule weren't driven by simple xenophobia or desire to restore some imagined golden age. They were pragmatic leaders who recognized that Egypt's future lay not in isolation, but in active engagement with the wider world. Kamose, the last king of the 17th dynasty, began the liberation campaign that would transform Egypt from a divided kingdom into the ancient world's first true superpower. His war wasn't just about expelling foreign rulers, but about reimagining what Egyptian civilization could become. The mummy of Kamose, discovered in a simple coffin near Thebes, tells a story of determination and sacrifice. His body bears the marks of violent death, probably sustained in battle against Hyksos forces or their Egyptian allies. Yet even in death, his face retains an expression of quiet dignity that speaks to the character required for such a monumental undertaking. This wasn't a king who sent others to fight his battles, but a warrior pharaoh who understood that leadership sometimes requires the ultimate personal sacrifice. Ahmose I, who completed his brother's work and established the 18th dynasty around 1550 BCE, possessed the diplomatic skills and strategic vision necessary to transform military victory into lasting political achievement. The reunification he accomplished wasn't just a restoration of earlier Egyptian unity, but the creation of something entirely new, a kingdom that could project power across vast distances while maintaining the cultural coherence that had always been Egypt's greatest strength. The new kingdom that Ahmose founded would endure for nearly 500 years, creating an imperial system that stretched from Nubia in the south to the Euphrates River in the north. But this expansion wasn't motivated by simple territorial ambition. Egyptian pharaohs understood that in a world of increasingly powerful neighbors, security required active defense of Egypt's interests beyond its traditional borders. The buffer zones they created in Nubia and the Levant protected the Nile Valley, while providing access to resources and trade routes essential for Egyptian prosperity. The administrative system that governed this expanded Egypt demonstrated remarkable sophistication in balancing central control with local autonomy. Provincial governors in distant territories weren't just military commanders, but cultural ambassadors who spread Egyptian influence through example rather than coercion. The temple complexes they built in places like Soleb and Amara incorporated local architectural traditions while maintaining distinctively Egyptian religious and symbolic content. The military innovations that made New Kingdom expansion possible reflected Egyptian ability to adopt and improve foreign technologies while maintaining their own tactical advantages. The horse-drawn chariot that had given Hyksos forces their initial superiority was perfected by Egyptian craftsmen who created lighter, faster, more maneuverable vehicles that dominated battlefields from Syria to Sudan. Egyptian composite bows, made from horn, wood, and sinew laminated together, could penetrate armor at distances that made traditional infantry formations obsolete. But Egyptian military success wasn't based solely on technological superiority. The professional army that emerged during the New Kingdom combined traditional Egyptian organizational skills with tactical flexibility learned from generations of conflict with diverse enemies. Egyptian generals like Thutmose III weren't just competent field commanders, but strategic thinkers who understood how military force could support diplomatic objectives and economic interests. The Battle of Megiddo, fought around 1457 BCE, demonstrates how Egyptian military doctrine had evolved since the Pyramid Age. Thutmose III faced a coalition of Canaanite princes supported by the powerful kingdom of Mitanni, enemies who possessed comparable weapons and training but lacked Egyptian advantages in logistics and coordination. The pharaoh's victory wasn't achieved through superior numbers or equipment, but through careful planning, intelligence gathering, and the ability to maintain unit cohesion during complex tactical maneuvers. The siege that followed the battle reveals another dimension of Egyptian military capabilities. The systematic investment of Megiddo required engineering skills that could construct and maintain siege works over extended periods, while keeping supply lines open across hundreds of miles of potentially hostile territory. The detailed records kept by Egyptian scribes during this campaign show a military organization that valued documentation and analysis as much as courage and skill in combat. Egyptian diplomacy during the New Kingdom was equally sophisticated, creating a network of alliances and tributary relationships that supported imperial expansion while minimizing the costs of direct military control. The Amarna letters, diplomatic correspondence preserved in the archives of Akhetaten, reveal a world where Egyptian pharaohs corresponded as equals with kings of Babylon, Assyria, and Mitanni, exchanging gifts and negotiating marriages that cemented political alliances across the ancient Near East. These diplomatic relationships weren't merely formal treaties, but personal bonds between rulers who understood each other's languages, customs, and concerns. Egyptian princesses married foreign kings, while daughters of allied rulers joined the pharaoh's household, creating family connections that made warfare between their kingdoms less likely. The gold that Egypt controlled from Nubian mines provided the luxury goods necessary to maintain these relationships, while imported materials like silver, lapis lazuli, and cedar wood enhanced Egyptian artistic and architectural projects. The cultural flowering that accompanied New Kingdom political expansion touched every aspect of Egyptian society, from royal palaces to workers' villages. The tomb paintings at Thebes showcase artistic techniques that combined traditional Egyptian principles with influences absorbed from conquered territories and allied kingdoms. The tomb of Nebamun, a middle-ranking official, includes scenes of daily life rendered with such skill and attention to detail that modern viewers can almost hear the laughter of children playing and smell the incense burning in household shrines. Egyptian sculpture during this period achieved new levels of technical mastery and emotional expression, moving beyond the formal constraints of earlier dynasties to explore individual personality and psychological depth. The colossal statues of Amenhotep III at Luxor Temple demonstrate how monumental scale could be combined with subtle modeling to create images that were simultaneously overwhelming and intimate. These weren't generic representations of royal power, but portraits of specific individuals whose character emerged through careful attention to facial features and bodily proportions. The religious architecture of the New Kingdom reflects the same balance between tradition and innovation that characterized other aspects of Egyptian culture. The temple complex at Karnak, expanded over centuries by successive pharaohs, became a stone encyclopedia of Egyptian theological thought, its walls covered with texts and images that recorded the evolving relationship between gods and mortals. The hypostyle hall, with its forest of massive columns supporting a roof that seemed to touch the heavens, created a space that was both architecturally impressive and spiritually transformative. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of New Kingdom religious architecture was its integration with the natural environment. The Temple of Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bahri seems to grow organically from the limestone cliffs that surround it, its terraced design echoing the geological formations, while creating spaces for ritual activities that connected worshippers to both divine and natural powers. The orientation of the building aligns with astronomical phenomena that held deep religious significance, while its courtyards and chapels provide settings for ceremonies that celebrated the eternal cycles of death and renewal. The reign of Hatshepsut herself, from roughly 1479 to 1458 BCE, demonstrates how Egyptian political traditions could accommodate exceptional circumstances while maintaining governmental stability. Her assumption of full pharaonic authority, complete with false beard and male royal regalia, wasn't a violation of Egyptian gender norms, but an adaptation of existing precedents to meet contemporary needs. The prosperity and cultural achievements of her 20-year reign vindicated her unconventional path to power while establishing precedents that would influence later female rulers. The trading expeditions that Hatshepsut sponsored to the mysterious land of Punt reveal Egyptian commercial networks that extended far beyond the traditional boundaries of Egyptian influence. The exotic goods these expeditions brought back, including incense trees that were transplanted to Egyptian temple gardens, demonstrate the Egyptian willingness to invest resources in long-term projects that enhanced both practical capabilities and cultural prestige. The detailed records of these trading ventures, preserved in temple reliefs and papyrus documents, show Egyptian merchants and diplomats who combined commercial acumen with scientific curiosity. The technological achievements of the New Kingdom built on earlier Egyptian innovations while incorporating knowledge gained through expanded contact with other civilizations. Egyptian metallurgy reached new levels of sophistication as craftsmen learned to work with iron, bronze alloys, and precious metals in combinations that created tools and weapons of unprecedented quality. The daggers found in Tutankhamun's tomb, one made from meteoric iron that must have been more valuable than gold, demonstrate technical mastery that wouldn't be equaled for centuries. Egyptian mathematics and astronomy during this period supported increasingly complex architectural and engineering projects while contributing to practical applications like navigation and timekeeping. The star charts painted on tomb ceilings weren't just decorative elements, but functional astronomical tools that helped priests calculate festival dates and ritual timing. The sundials and water clocks developed during this period demonstrate precision in measuring time that supported the administrative efficiency essential for governing a vast empire. The medical knowledge preserved in New Kingdom papyri reflects centuries of systematic observation and experimentation that produced diagnostic techniques and therapeutic interventions rivaling those of much later civilizations. The Edwin Smith surgical papyrus describes procedures for treating head injuries, fractures, and wounds with a methodical approach that emphasized careful examination, logical reasoning, and realistic assessment of treatment possibilities. Egyptian physicians understood the importance of cleanliness, proper nutrition, and psychological factors in healing, creating a medical tradition that addressed the whole person rather than just specific symptoms. The literature produced during the New Kingdom includes some of ancient Egypt's greatest masterpieces, works that explore universal themes through distinctively Egyptian cultural perspectives. The tale of Sinuhe, though composed earlier, achieved its greatest popularity during this period. Its story of exile and redemption resonating with audiences who lived in an age of expanded horizons and cultural contact. The protagonist's journey through foreign lands and eventual return to Egypt reflected the experiences of many New Kingdom Egyptians who traveled far from home in service of Pharaoh and kingdom. The love poetry of the New Kingdom reveals a more personal and intimate side of Egyptian culture, showing how ordinary people experienced romance, desire, and emotional fulfillment within the framework of Egyptian social customs. These poems weren't crude or simplistic, but sophisticated literary works that used natural imagery and religious symbolism to explore the complexities of human relationships. The lovers in these poems speak with voices that remain recognizable across thousands of years, their hopes and fears echoing our own, despite the vast differences in their cultural circumstances. Egyptian funerary literature during this period became increasingly elaborate and personalized, as individuals commissioned texts that reflected their specific circumstances, achievements, and spiritual aspirations. The Book of the Dead, which evolved from earlier pyramid texts and coffin texts, provided detailed guidance for navigating the afterlife, while acknowledging that each person's journey would be unique. The spell collections varied according to the deceased's social status, profession, and personal beliefs, creating customized guidebooks for the ultimate adventure. The democratic implications of this religious development were profound, as access to afterlife privileges continued to expand beyond the royal and noble classes. to include virtually anyone who could afford proper burial preparations. This wasn't just a matter of economic accessibility, but reflected genuine theological conviction that divine justice and mercy extended to all people, regardless of their earthly circumstances. The judgment scene depicted in tomb paintings shows the hearts of deceased individuals being weighed against the feather of truth, with outcomes determined by moral conduct rather than social position. The international influence of Egyptian culture during the New Kingdom extended far beyond political and military relationships to encompass artistic styles, religious practices, and intellectual traditions that were adopted and adapted by neighboring civilizations. Egyptian artistic motifs appear in Minoan palaces, Mesopotamian temples, and Nubian royal tombs, evidence of cultural exchange that enriched all participants while maintaining their distinctive identities. The Egyptian hieroglyphic writing system inspired alphabetic scripts that would eventually evolve into modern writing systems, while Egyptian architectural techniques influenced building traditions throughout the ancient Mediterranean world. The gradual transformation of Egyptian society during the New Kingdom reflected both internal developments and external influences that created new opportunities and challenges for pharaonic government. The professional military class that emerged during this period developed its own traditions and loyalties that sometimes conflicted with traditional civilian authority. The priests who administered Egypt's increasingly wealthy temples accumulated resources and influence that made them potential rivals to royal power. The merchants and craftsmen who prospered from imperial expansion created new forms of wealth and social mobility that complicated traditional hierarchies. These tensions weren't necessarily destructive, but reflected the natural evolution of a civilization that had successfully adapted to changing circumstances while maintaining its essential character. The flexibility that had enabled Egypt to survive the intermediate periods continued to serve the kingdom well during the imperial age, allowing it to accommodate new realities without abandoning the fundamental principles that had guided Egyptian society since its earliest days. The reign of Amenhotep III, from roughly 1391 to 1353 BCE, represents the pinnacle of New Kingdom prosperity and cultural achievement. His kingdom stretched from the Fourth Cataract in Sudan to the Euphrates River in Syria, generating wealth that supported artistic and architectural projects of unprecedented scale and magnificence. The palace complex he built at Malkata was a city in itself, complete with harbours, gardens, workshops, and residential areas that housed thousands of people involved in court life and governmental administration. The diplomatic correspondence from Amenhotep III's reign reveals an Egyptian pharaoh who was acknowledged as first among equals by the other great powers of his time. Kings of Babylon and Assyria addressed him as brother, while rulers of smaller states sought his protection and support. The gold mines of Nubia provided resources for maintaining these relationships through generous gift-giving, while Egyptian military strength ensured that diplomacy was backed by credible deterrent force. The religious developments during Amenhotep III's reign set the stage for the more dramatic changes that would follow under his son and successor. The solar theology that had always been central to Egyptian religion began to emphasize the universal aspects of divine power, suggesting that the same cosmic forces that sustained Egypt also governed the entire world. This theological evolution reflected the practical realities of ruling a multinational empire while maintaining the special relationship between Egypt and its gods. The artistic innovations of this period pushed Egyptian aesthetic traditions to new levels of sophistication and expressiveness. The portraits of Amenhotep III and Queen T show rulers who combined traditional symbols of divine authority with realistic representations of individual personality and character. These weren't idealized images, but portraits of specific people whose humanity enhanced rather than diminished their royal dignity. The transition to the reign of Akhenaten around 1353 BCE marked one of the most dramatic episodes in Egyptian history, a period of religious and artistic revolution that challenged fundamental assumptions about divine authority and royal legitimacy. The young pharaoh's decision to abandon traditional Egyptian polytheism in favor of exclusive worship of the Aten, the solar disk, represented either visionary religious insight or dangerous political miscalculation, depending on one's perspective. The new capital city that Akhenaten built at Amarna was designed to embody his revolutionary religious vision, its temples open to the sky rather than enclosed in traditional darkness, its art depicting the royal family in intimate domestic scenes that violated centuries of formal protocol. The famous bust of Queen Nefertiti, with its combination of idealized beauty and psychological penetration, exemplifies the artistic achievements of this brief but influential period. The Amarna experiment lasted only about 17 years, but its impact on Egyptian culture extended far beyond its chronological boundaries. The artistic techniques developed during Akhenaten's reign influenced Egyptian art for generations, while the religious questions raised by his reforms continue to resonate in later theological developments. The return to traditional religious practices under his successors wasn't a simple restoration, but a synthesis that incorporated insights gained during the Amarna period. The reign of Tutankhamun, though brief and politically insignificant, provides our most complete picture of New Kingdom royal culture through the extraordinary artifacts preserved in his virtually intact tomb. The golden treasures that surrounded the young pharaoh's mummy weren't just displays of wealth, but functional objects designed to facilitate his transformation into a divine being. The craftsmanship evident in these objects represents the pinnacle of Egyptian artistic achievement, combining traditional techniques with innovations that pushed the boundaries of what was technically possible. The chariots, weapons, and hunting equipment found in Tutankhamun's tomb reveal a pharaoh who participated actively in the military and sporting activities expected of Egyptian kings. The damage visible on some of these objects shows they were actually used rather than created solely for burial, evidence of a young ruler who took seriously his responsibilities as military leader and divine protector of Egypt. The restoration of traditional religious practices during Tutankhamun's reign wasn't accomplished through persecution or violent suppression of Amarna innovations, but through gradual policy changes that emphasize continuity with Egypt's ancient traditions. The young pharaoh's advisors understood that stability required accommodation of different viewpoints rather than rigid enforcement of orthodox doctrine, a lesson that would prove valuable for their successors. The military campaigns of the 19th dynasty pharaohs, particularly Seti I and Ramesses II, represented the final flowering of New Kingdom imperial power. These rulers faced new challenges from emerging powers like the Hittite Empire, enemies who possessed military capabilities comparable to Egypt's own, and who couldn't be defeated through traditional tactics or intimidated through diplomatic pressure. The Battle of Kadesh, fought around 1274 BCE between Ramesses II and the Hittite king Muwatalli, demonstrates both the capabilities and limitations of New Kingdom military power. The detailed Egyptian accounts of this battle, carved into temple walls throughout Egypt, show a pharaoh who barely avoided disaster through personal courage and tactical improvisation when his initial battle plan failed. The eventual peace treaty between Egypt and the Hittites, the earliest surviving international peace agreement, recognized that neither empire could achieve decisive victory over the other, and that mutual accommodation served both parties' interests better than continued warfare. The monumental building projects undertaken by Ramesses II, from Abu Simbel in Nubia to Pyramesses in the Delta, represent the culmination of New Kingdom architectural achievement. These structures weren't just displays of royal power, but functional elements in the administrative and religious systems that governed Egyptian society. The temples served as economic centers, educational institutions, and cultural repositories that preserved and transmitted Egyptian traditions to future generations. The gradual decline of New Kingdom power during the 20th dynasty reflected both internal developments and external pressures that even Egyptian resilience and adaptability couldn't entirely overcome. The invasions of the Sea Peoples, mysterious maritime raiders who disrupted civilizations throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, forced Egypt to expend enormous resources on defense while disrupting the trade networks that supported imperial prosperity. The increasing power of the Amun priesthood at Thebes created internal political divisions that weakened central authority and made coordinated responses to external threats more difficult. Yet even as the new kingdom's imperial power waned, Egyptian civilization continued to demonstrate the cultural vitality and institutional flexibility that had enabled its survival through previous periods of political fragmentation. The wisdom literature, artistic traditions, and technological innovations developed during the imperial age provided foundations for renewal that would serve Egypt well during the challenges ahead. The legacy of the new kingdom extended far beyond Egypt's borders, influencing the development of civilizations throughout the ancient world. The diplomatic practices, military techniques, and administrative systems pioneered by Egyptian pharaohs provided models that were adopted and adapted by their successors and neighbors. The artistic and architectural achievements of this period continued to inspire builders and craftsmen for centuries, while Egyptian religious and philosophical ideas contributed to the intellectual traditions that would eventually give rise to classical Greek and Roman civilization. As we prepare to follow the Egyptian story through its later transformations, we can see how the imperial age had both fulfilled and transformed the potential that had been developing since the earliest dynasties. The pyramid builders of the Old Kingdom had created monuments that embodied Egyptian understanding of cosmic order and divine authority. The New Kingdom pharaohs had taken these same principles and applied them to the governance of a multinational empire, demonstrating that Egyptian wisdom could adapt to new circumstances while maintaining its essential character. The challenges that lay ahead would test this adaptability in new ways, as Egypt faced conquest by foreign powers who brought different cultural traditions and political systems. But the foundations laid during 3,000 years of independent development had created a civilization so deeply rooted and broadly influential that it would continue to shape human culture long after the last native pharaoh had surrendered the double crown. The story of ancient Egypt wasn't ending, but entering a new phase, one that would reveal new dimensions of the remarkable civilization that had grown from humble farming villages beside the life-giving Nile. The third intermediate period that began around 1070 BCE wasn't a sudden collapse, but rather a gradual transformation that revealed new dimensions of Egyptian resilience and cultural adaptability. As centralized pharaonic authority weakened, the great temples became centers of political and economic power, their high priests accumulating resources and influence that rivaled traditional royal authority. At Thebes, the high priests of Amun established what was essentially an independent kingdom, minting their own coins and conducting their own foreign policy while maintaining the fiction of loyalty to pharaohs ruling from the distant delta. This wasn't the chaos that had characterized earlier intermediate periods, but a more sophisticated form of decentralization that preserved Egyptian cultural traditions while adapting them to new political realities. The Theban priest-kings weren't destroyers of pharaonic tradition, but inheritors who understood that effective leadership required flexibility in changing circumstances. Their tombs and monuments demonstrate continued mastery of Egyptian artistic techniques, while incorporating innovations that reflected their unique position as both religious and secular rulers. In the north, a parallel development saw the rise of Libyan dynasties whose rulers had originally served as mercenaries in Egyptian armies, but gradually established their own power bases in the fertile Delta region. These foreign-born pharaohs didn't impose alien traditions on Egyptian society, but instead embraced Egyptian culture so thoroughly that their monuments and inscriptions are virtually indistinguishable from those of native rulers. The 22nd dynasty, established around 945 BCE by Shoshenq I, demonstrates how Egyptian civilization had developed such cultural magnetism that even conquerors became converts. The phenomenon of multiple pharaohs ruling simultaneously in different parts of Egypt might seem like evidence of political failure, but it actually represented a sophisticated solution to the challenge of governing a large territory with limited communication technology. Each regional pharaoh could respond quickly to local needs, while maintaining connection to broader Egyptian traditions through shared religious practices, artistic styles, and administrative procedures. The result was a kind of federal system that preserved Egyptian unity while allowing for regional variation and innovation. The artistic achievements of this period reveal craftsmen working within well-established traditions while developing new techniques and exploring fresh approaches to familiar themes. The bronze statuettes of gods and sacred animals produced during the Third Intermediate Period display technical mastery that equals anything from earlier dynasties, using lost wax casting and surface treatments that created objects of extraordinary beauty and spiritual power. These weren't crude copies of earlier masterpieces, but confident expressions of continuing artistic vitality. The religious developments of this era show Egyptian theology continuing to evolve and deepen, incorporating new insights while maintaining connection to ancient wisdom. The cult of Isis expanded significantly during this period, transforming a relatively minor goddess into one of Egypt's most beloved and powerful deities. Her mythology, which told of her devotion to her murdered husband Osiris and her protection of their son Horus, resonated with ordinary Egyptians who faced their own challenges of loss, suffering, and hope for renewal. The democratization of religious practice that had begun during earlier periods reached full flowering during the Third Intermediate Period, as elaborate burial preparations and afterlife provisions became accessible to broader segments of society. The Papyrus of Ani, one of the finest surviving copies of the Book of the Dead, was commissioned by a relatively modest scribe, whose resources allowed him to acquire a beautifully illustrated guidebook for his journey through the afterlife. This wasn't evidence of social decline, but of expanding opportunities for spiritual fulfillment. The international relationships that Egypt maintained during this period demonstrate the continuing respect that foreign powers held for Egyptian culture and expertise, even when Egyptian military power was no longer dominant. Egyptian priests and scholars were consulted by rulers throughout the ancient Near East on matters ranging from architecture and engineering to medicine and astronomy. The knowledge systems that had been developed over millennia of Egyptian civilization continued to provide valuable insights for neighbors who faced similar challenges. The technological innovations of this period included advances in metallurgy, glassmaking, and textile production that built on earlier Egyptian achievements while incorporating techniques learned through expanded trade contacts. Egyptian craftsmen developed new methods for working with iron, creating tools and weapons that were both functional and beautiful. The decorated bronze mirrors, cosmetic containers, and jewelry of this era demonstrate how utilitarian objects could be transformed into works of art through skilled craftsmanship and careful attention to aesthetic principles. The literary works produced during the Third Intermediate Period reflect themes of uncertainty and renewal that spoke to audiences living through times of political change. The prophecy of Nefertiti, though composed earlier, gained new relevance as Egyptians contemplated the relationship between human agency and divine will in shaping historical events. These texts weren't escapist fantasies, but serious meditations on how individuals and communities should respond to circumstances beyond their immediate control. The gradual reunification of Egypt that began during the 8th century BCE emerged from the southern kingdom of Kush, whose rulers had preserved Egyptian cultural traditions with such devotion that they eventually claimed the right to restore proper pharaonic authority throughout the Nile Valley. The Kushite pharaohs of the 25th dynasty weren't foreign conquerors, but cultural conservatives who believed that true Egyptian kingship had been corrupted by northern rulers who had compromised with foreign influences. Piye, the Kushite king, who conquered most of Egypt around 747 BCE, approached his campaigns not as mere military expeditions, but as religious missions to restore Ma'at to a land that had fallen away from its proper relationship with the gods. His victory stela, carved in both Egyptian hieroglyphs and the Kushite Meroitic script, describes his horror at finding sacred horses mistreated in the stables of defeated enemies, evidence of moral corruption that justified his intervention in Egyptian affairs. The Kushite restoration brought renewed vigor to Egyptian artistic and architectural traditions that had been maintained but not significantly developed during the preceding centuries. The pyramid-building program initiated by the Kushite pharaohs at sites like Nuri and Jebel Barkal created monuments that combined traditional Egyptian design principles with distinctively Nubian architectural features. These structures weren't crude imitations of Old Kingdom pyramids, but sophisticated expressions of a mature civilization that understood how to honor the past while addressing contemporary needs. The Renaissance in Egyptian sculpture during the Kushite period produced works that achieved new levels of technical excellence while exploring psychological depths that earlier artists had rarely attempted. The portrait heads of Kushite pharaohs show rulers marked by the responsibilities of leadership, their faces bearing expressions of determination and spiritual authority that transcends conventional representations of royal power. These weren't idealized images, but portraits of specific individuals whose character emerged through careful attention to physiognomy and expression. The religious reforms undertaken by the Kushite pharaohs weren't innovations, but rather attempts to restore practices that they believed had been neglected or corrupted during the preceding period of political fragmentation. Their emphasis on traditional rituals, proper temple maintenance, and orthodox theological doctrine appealed to Egyptian priests and common people who yearned for stability and continuity after centuries of uncertainty. The international position that Egypt achieved under Kushite rule reflected the continuing attraction of Egyptian civilization for peoples throughout the ancient world. Diplomatic correspondence from this period shows Egyptian pharaohs exchanging gifts and treaties with rulers in Assyria, Greece, and other Mediterranean civilizations, evidence that political weakness hadn't diminished Egypt's cultural prestige or intellectual influence. The Assyrian invasions that eventually ended Kushite rule in Egypt weren't motivated by contempt for Egyptian civilization, but rather by recognition of Egypt's continuing importance as a source of wealth, knowledge, and strategic advantage. Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal, the Assyrian kings who conquered Egypt, showed remarkable respect for Egyptian traditions, even as they imposed foreign political control. Their inscriptions boast of carrying off Egyptian treasures and scholars, acknowledging that Egypt possessed cultural riches worth acquiring and preserving. The site restoration that followed the expulsion of Assyrian forces around 664 BCE represented yet another demonstration of Egyptian resilience and adaptability. Psamtik I, the native Egyptian ruler who re-established independent pharaonic authority, understood that successful leadership required balancing respect for tradition with openness to beneficial innovations. His reign combined conscious archaism in art and religion with practical modernization in military organization and economic policy. The artistic revival of the site period drew inspiration directly from Old and Middle Kingdom masterpieces. But this wasn't mere copying or nostalgic romanticism. Site craftsmen studied earlier works with the analytical attention of scholars, learning techniques that had been lost during intervening centuries while developing their own interpretations of classical themes. The result was art that was simultaneously traditional and innovative, rooted in ancient wisdom but responsive to contemporary circumstances. The economic prosperity that Egypt achieved during the site period was built on expanded trade relationships that connected the Nile Valley to commercial networks stretching from Spain to India. Egyptian merchants established trading posts throughout the Mediterranean, while foreign traders brought exotic goods and new ideas to Egyptian markets. The port city of Naucratis became a cosmopolitan center where Greeks, Phoenicians, and Egyptians mingled freely, creating cultural exchanges that enriched all participants. The military innovations of the Sate period included the systematic recruitment of foreign mercenaries, who brought new tactical approaches and weapons technologies to Egyptian armies. These weren't signs of Egyptian military decline, but evidence of practical adaptability that recognized valuable contributions regardless of their origins. The Greek hoplites and Carian marines who served Sate pharaohs became integral parts of Egyptian military organization while adopting Egyptian cultural practices and religious beliefs. The intellectual achievements of this period included renewed interest in ancient Egyptian wisdom literature and scientific texts, as scholars worked to preserve and interpret knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. The medical papyri copied during the Sate period demonstrate how ancient therapeutic techniques were being updated and refined through contemporary observation and experimentation. Egyptian physicians during this era combined traditional remedies with new treatments learned through contact with Greek and Near Eastern medical traditions. The religious developments of the Sate period reflected the same balance between conservation and innovation that characterized other aspects of Egyptian society. Ancient rituals were restored and performed with elaborate ceremony, while new theological insights were incorporated into traditional frameworks. The animal cults that flourished during this time weren't signs of religious decline, but sophisticated expressions of beliefs about the relationship between divine power and natural phenomena. The Persian conquest of Egypt in 525 BCE under Cambyses II marked another major transition in Egyptian history, but even foreign rule couldn't suppress the cultural vitality that had sustained Egyptian civilization through previous challenges. The Persian pharaohs, despite their foreign origins, found it necessary to adopt Egyptian royal titles and participate in traditional ceremonies to maintain legitimacy among their Egyptian subjects. Darius I, perhaps the most successful of the Persian pharaohs, commissioned major construction projects that demonstrated his commitment to Egyptian cultural traditions. The temple he built at Hebes in the Karga oasis combined Persian architectural elements with distinctively Egyptian religious iconography, creating a monument that honored both traditions while serving the practical needs of local worshippers. The administrative systems that the Persians established in Egypt incorporated existing Egyptian bureaucratic practices while introducing innovations that improved efficiency and communication. The multilingual inscriptions from this period show Persian officials working alongside Egyptian scribes and priests, evidence of cultural collaboration rather than simple domination. The result was a governmental system that preserved Egyptian institutional continuity while connecting the Nile Valley to the broader Persian Empire. The brief restoration of native Egyptian rule during the 28th through 30th dynasties, from 404 to 332 BCE, demonstrated that Egyptian political traditions retained sufficient vitality to challenge even the mighty Persian Empire when circumstances were favorable. These native pharaohs weren't mere rebels against foreign authority, but legitimate rulers who drew on deep wells of Egyptian cultural identity and institutional memory. Nectanebo I and his successors undertook ambitious building projects that rivaled those of earlier dynasties, commissioning temples and monuments that combined traditional Egyptian design principles with contemporary artistic innovations. The Temple of Isis at Philae, though completed under later Ptolemaic rule, was begun during this period and exemplifies the continuing creativity of Egyptian religious architecture. The arrival of Alexander the Great in 332 BCE represented the beginning of a new chapter in Egyptian history, but it wasn't the end of Egyptian civilization, as some historians have suggested. The Macedonian conqueror showed remarkable respect for Egyptian traditions, consulting the oracle of Amun at Siwa and adopting pharaonic titles that acknowledged his role within Egyptian religious and political frameworks. The Ptolemaic dynasty that followed Alexander's death created a unique synthesis of Greek and Egyptian cultures that enriched both traditions while maintaining the essential character of each. The Ptolemies weren't merely foreign rulers imposed on Egyptian society, but participants in a cultural dialogue that produced new forms of art, literature, and intellectual inquiry while preserving ancient wisdom and practices. The Great Library of Alexandria, established during the early Ptolemaic period, became a center of learning that attracted scholars from throughout the ancient world. Egyptian priests worked alongside Greek philosophers and scientists, sharing knowledge that had been accumulated over millennia while contributing to new discoveries and insights. The result was an intellectual renaissance that demonstrated the continuing vitality of Egyptian civilization, even under foreign political control. The religious syncretism that developed during the Ptolemaic period created new deities like Serapis, who combined Greek and Egyptian characteristics while serving the spiritual needs of increasingly diverse populations. These weren't corruptions of pure Egyptian religion, but creative adaptations that allowed ancient wisdom to speak to contemporary circumstances. The cult of Isis spread throughout the Roman world, carrying Egyptian religious insights to audiences who had never seen the Nile. The artistic achievements of Ptolemaic Egypt demonstrate how Egyptian aesthetic principles could incorporate Greek influences while maintaining their distinctive character. The temple reliefs at Dendera and Edfu show traditional Egyptian religious scenes, rendered with technical precision and artistic sophistication that equals anything from earlier periods. These weren't decadent imitations, but confident expressions of a living tradition that continued to evolve and develop. The Roman conquest of Egypt in 30 BCE marked the end of pharaonic rule, but not the end of Egyptian cultural influence. Roman emperors adopted pharaonic titles when ruling Egypt, acknowledging the continuing importance of Egyptian religious and political traditions. The temples built during the Roman period, such as those at Kalabsha and Dhaka, maintained traditional Egyptian architectural forms while incorporating Roman engineering techniques and decorative elements. The spread of Christianity throughout Egypt during the early centuries CE created new opportunities for Egyptian cultural expression, as ancient artistic techniques and symbolic systems were adapted to serve Christian religious needs. The Coptic art and literature that emerged from this cultural synthesis preserved essential elements of pharaonic civilization while transforming them to express new spiritual insights. The Islamic conquest of Egypt in 641 CE brought another wave of cultural change. But even this dramatic transformation couldn't erase the deep foundations that had been laid over thousands of years of continuous development. Arabic writers and scholars showed profound respect for ancient Egyptian achievements, preserving and transmitting knowledge that might otherwise have been lost to later generations. The rediscovery of ancient Egypt by European scholars during the 18th and 19th centuries revealed to the modern world a civilization of extraordinary sophistication and enduring influence. The decipherment of hieroglyphic writing by Jean-François Champollion in 1822 opened new windows into Egyptian thought and experience, allowing ancient voices to speak directly across the centuries. Archaeological discoveries continue to reveal new aspects of Egyptian civilization, from the tomb of Tutankhamun to recent finds in the Valley of the Kings and beyond. Each discovery adds to our understanding of how this remarkable culture developed and maintained itself over more than 3,000 years, creating achievements that continue to inspire wonder and admiration. The legacy of ancient Egypt extends far beyond the monuments and artifacts that survive in museums and archaeological sites. Egyptian contributions to mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and engineering provided foundations for later scientific development throughout the ancient world. Egyptian religious and philosophical insights influenced the development of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, while Egyptian artistic principles continue to inform contemporary design and architecture. The administrative and legal systems pioneered by Egyptian pharaohs established precedents for governmental organization that influenced political development throughout the ancient Mediterranean world and beyond. The concept of divine kingship, the integration of religious and secular authority, and the balance between central control and local autonomy that characterized Egyptian government provided models that were adapted by numerous later civilizations. Perhaps most importantly, ancient Egypt demonstrated that human societies could create stable, prosperous, and culturally rich civilizations that could adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining their essential character and values. The Egyptian achievement of balancing permanence with change, tradition with innovation, local identity with universal principles, offers insights that remain relevant for contemporary societies facing their own challenges of cultural continuity and adaptive change. The voices that speak to us from ancient Egyptian texts, the faces that gaze at us from portrait sculptures, the hands that crafted objects of enduring beauty, all remind us that the people who created this civilization were not so different from ourselves. They loved their families, worried about their futures, sought meaning in their lives, and hoped that their achievements would be remembered by later generations. In preserving and studying their legacy, we honor not just their memory, but our shared humanity. As we reach the end of our gentle journey through this remarkable civilization, we can see how the farming communities that first settled along the Nile's banks grew into something far greater than the sum of their parts. They created not just a successful society, but a way of understanding human possibility that continues to inspire and guide us. Their story reminds us that with patience, wisdom, and dedication to enduring values, human beings can build civilizations that last for millennia and leave legacies that enrich all who come after. The ancient Egyptians understood something that we sometimes forget in our hurried modern world: that true achievement requires not just individual brilliance, but collective effort sustained over generations. The pyramids weren't built in a day, and neither was the civilization that created them, but through persistent dedication to their highest ideals, through willingness to learn from both success and failure, through commitment to balancing stability with necessary change, they created something that has outlasted empires and continues to speak to the human heart across the vast expanse of time. In the quiet moments before sleep, when the busy concerns of daily life fade into the background, we can still hear the whispers of those ancient voices calling to us across the centuries. They remind us that we too are part of an ongoing human story, that our own lives and choices contribute to legacies that will influence generations yet unborn. The gentle rhythm of the Nile that sustained their civilization flows on, carrying with it the wisdom and wonder of those who understood that in building for eternity, we discover what it truly means to be human. The wisdom they developed about living in harmony with natural cycles found expression in their understanding of time itself as something both linear and circular, progressive, yet eternal. Egyptian calendars weren't just practical tools for organizing agricultural work, but sophisticated attempts to map the relationship between human activity and cosmic order. They recognized that while individual lives moved forward through birth, growth, and death, the larger patterns of existence repeated themselves in ways that connected each generation to all those that had come before and would come after. This cyclical understanding of time influenced every aspect of Egyptian culture, from the daily rituals performed in temple sanctuaries to the grand festivals that brought entire communities together in celebration. The Opet festival at Thebes, which lasted for weeks during the flood season, wasn't merely a religious ceremony, but a renewal of the social contract that bound Pharaoh and people together in common purpose. During these celebrations, normal hierarchies were temporarily suspended as everyone participated in rituals that reaffirmed their shared identity as children of the same divine order. The processions that carried sacred barges through crowded streets created moments of communion between gods and mortals that transcended the boundaries of everyday experience. Common people who rarely entered temple precincts could approach divine images, offer prayers, and receive blessings that connected them directly to the cosmic forces that governed their lives. These weren't empty ceremonies, but profound spiritual experiences that strengthened both individual faith and communal bonds. The economic dimensions of these festivals reveal how Egyptian society had learned to transform religious observance into practical benefit for entire communities. The vast quantities of food, drink, and materials required for major celebrations, created employment for craftsmen, farmers, and merchants, while redistributing wealth throughout society in ways that supported both immediate needs and long-term prosperity. Temple workshops that produced festival decorations, ritual objects, and ceremonial clothing became centers of artistic innovation, where traditional techniques were refined and new approaches were developed. The international visitors who attended these festivals carried home impressions of Egyptian civilization that enhanced the kingdom's diplomatic influence and commercial relationships. Foreign ambassadors who witnessed the elaborate ceremonies at Memphis or Thebes returned to their own courts with stories of Egyptian wealth and sophistication that influenced political calculations throughout the ancient world. The gifts they received and the hospitality they experienced created personal bonds that complemented formal treaty relationships. Egyptian festival culture also provided opportunities for social mobility that were rare in most ancient societies. Talented performers, skilled craftsmen, and eloquent speakers could attract royal attention during these celebrations, leading to appointments and advancement that transformed their family circumstances. The autobiographical inscriptions of officials who rose from humble origins often mention their first recognition during festival performances, evidence of how cultural events served as talent discovery mechanisms within Egyptian society. The integration of music, dance, and dramatic performance in Egyptian religious festivals created artistic traditions that influenced cultural development throughout the ancient Mediterranean world. Egyptian musical instruments, performance techniques, and compositional structures were adopted and adapted by neighboring civilizations, while Egyptian dancers and musicians found employment in courts from Mesopotamia to Greece. The harps, lyres, and percussion instruments depicted in tomb paintings weren't just ritual accessories, but sophisticated musical technologies that supported complex artistic performances. The preservation of Egyptian musical traditions through written notation and artistic representation allows modern scholars to reconstruct ancient performance practices with remarkable accuracy. The songs recorded in papyrus documents reveal sophisticated understanding of melody, rhythm, and harmonic relationships that created emotionally powerful musical experiences. The work songs that coordinated group labor, the love songs that expressed personal feelings, and the religious hymns that praised divine attributes all demonstrate how music served both practical and spiritual functions in Egyptian society. Egyptian dance traditions combined athletic skill with religious symbolism in ways that transformed human movement into divine communication. The ritual dances performed in temple ceremonies weren't entertainment, but sacred acts that channeled cosmic energies and maintained proper relationships between earthly and heavenly realms. The training required to master these complex movement patterns created professional dance companies whose members enjoyed social status and economic security comparable to other skilled craftsmen. The influence of Egyptian performance traditions extended far beyond entertainment into areas of education, therapy, and social integration. Dance and music were used to teach children about proper behavior, to treat various physical and emotional ailments, and to help diverse populations develop shared cultural identities. The therapeutic applications of Egyptian music included specific rhythms and melodies designed to address different medical conditions, while dance movements were prescribed as physical therapy for injuries and chronic ailments. The development of Egyptian literature during the later dynasties reflects a civilization that had achieved sufficient stability and prosperity to support purely artistic endeavors alongside practical and religious writing. The emergence of fiction as a distinct literary genre allowed Egyptian authors to explore human experiences and emotions that couldn't be adequately addressed through historical chronicles or religious texts. These stories weren't escapist fantasies, but sophisticated explorations of moral, psychological, and social themes that resonated with audiences across different social classes. The Tale of the Shipwrecked Sailor, one of the earliest surviving works of Egyptian fiction, combines adventure narrative with philosophical reflection in ways that anticipate much later literary developments. The protagonist's encounter with a magical serpent on a mysterious island becomes an opportunity to explore themes of fate, courage, and the relationship between individual agency and divine will. The story's nested structure, with its tale within a tale, demonstrates sophisticated narrative techniques that influence storytelling traditions throughout the ancient world. Egyptian love poetry achieved levels of emotional sophistication and artistic refinement that wouldn't be equaled in world literature for many centuries. These poems weren't crude expressions of physical desire, but complex meditations on the nature of romantic attraction, emotional intimacy, and spiritual connection between individuals. The lovers in these poems speak with voices that transcend their specific cultural circumstances, expressing universal experiences of longing, joy, jealousy, and fulfillment that remain recognizable to modern readers. The technical mastery evident in Egyptian poetry includes sophisticated use of wordplay, metaphor, and rhythmic patterns that created multiple layers of meaning within individual compositions. Poets worked within established formal constraints while finding creative ways to express personal insights and emotions, much like their contemporaries in other artistic disciplines. The preservation of these poems in both hieroglyphic and hieratic scripts suggests they were valued by audiences ranging from educated scribes to royal court circles. The medical literature produced during Egypt's later periods represents the culmination of thousands of years of systematic observation and experimentation. Egyptian physicians had developed diagnostic techniques, surgical procedures, and therapeutic interventions that wouldn't be surpassed until the modern era. The gynecological papyri reveal detailed understanding of female anatomy and reproductive health that enabled effective treatment of conditions that remain mysterious to other ancient medical traditions. Egyptian surgical techniques included procedures for treating cataracts, setting broken bones, and removing tumors that required both technical skill and theoretical knowledge about human anatomy and physiology. The surgical instruments found in physicians' tombs demonstrate precision manufacturing that created tools capable of delicate operations while maintaining sterile conditions that prevented infection. These weren't primitive medical practices, but sophisticated healthcare systems that served patients across all social classes. The pharmacological knowledge preserved in Egyptian medical texts includes detailed information about hundreds of plant, animal, and mineral substances used to treat various ailments. Egyptian physicians understood principles of dosage, drug interaction, and treatment duration that enabled them to prescribe complex therapeutic regimens tailored to individual patient needs. The accuracy of their botanical and zoological observations provided foundations for later scientific investigation while serving immediate practical purposes. The integration of physical and psychological treatment approaches in Egyptian medicine reflects sophisticated understanding of the relationships between mental and physical health that wouldn't be fully appreciated by Western medicine until recent centuries. Egyptian physicians recognized that emotional distress could manifest as physical symptoms, while physical ailments could create psychological complications that required separate treatment. Their therapeutic approaches address both dimensions of illness through combinations of medical intervention and religious healing practices. The educational systems that supported Egyptian medical practice created professional standards and training programs that ensured consistent quality of care across the kingdom. Medical schools attached to major temples provided theoretical instruction, while practical training was conducted through apprenticeships with experienced physicians. The graduation requirements included demonstration of surgical skills, knowledge of pharmacology, and ability to diagnose complex conditions, creating healthcare professionals whose competence rivaled that of much later medical practitioners. The international influence of Egyptian medical knowledge extended throughout the ancient world as foreign students traveled to Egypt to study with renowned physicians, and Egyptian medical practitioners were recruited by rulers in distant kingdoms. The medical papyri that were translated into Greek Latin, and other languages carried Egyptian therapeutic techniques to regions where they influenced local healing traditions. This medical diplomacy enhanced Egypt's international relationships while spreading beneficial knowledge to populations that might otherwise have lacked access to effective healthcare. The astronomical achievements of later Egyptian civilization built on earlier observations, while incorporating new mathematical techniques and observational instruments that increased the precision of celestial calculations. Egyptian astronomers could predict eclipses, track planetary movements, and calculate the length of the year with accuracy that wasn't exceeded until the development of modern scientific instruments. Their star catalogues and constellation maps provided navigation aids for maritime commerce, while supporting religious calculations that determined festival dates and ritual timing. The architectural applications of Egyptian astronomical knowledge created buildings that functioned as three-dimensional calendars and cosmic observatories. The orientation of temples, the placement of windows and doorways, and the alignment of processional routes were calculated to create specific lighting effects on particular days of the year. These weren't merely aesthetic choices, but functional elements that transformed architectural spaces into instruments for measuring and celebrating cosmic cycles. The development of more sophisticated mathematical techniques during Egypt's later periods enabled architects and engineers to undertake increasingly complex construction projects while maintaining the precision and durability that characterized earlier Egyptian monuments. The mathematical papyri from this era include problems involving compound interest, geometric progressions, and algebraic equations that demonstrate theoretical understanding comparable to much later mathematical developments. Egyptian engineering achievements during the Ptolemaic and Roman periods included innovations in hydraulics, mechanics, and materials science that solved practical problems while maintaining aesthetic standards established during earlier dynasties. The lighthouse at Alexandria combined cutting-edge engineering with traditional Egyptian architectural principles, creating a structure that served practical navigation needs while symbolizing Egyptian intellectual and cultural achievements. The mechanical devices described by Hero of Alexandria demonstrate how Egyptian inventors combined theoretical knowledge with practical ingenuity to create machines that anticipated much later technological developments. The preservation and transmission of Egyptian knowledge through the tumultuous centuries that followed the end of pharaonic rule reflects the deep cultural roots that had been established over millennia of continuous development. Egyptian scribes working in Coptic monasteries copied ancient texts while translating them into new languages, ensuring that valuable knowledge wouldn't be lost during periods of political upheaval. Islamic scholars who conquered Egypt showed remarkable respect for indigenous intellectual traditions, incorporating Egyptian insights into their own scholarly works, while preserving original documents in libraries and academic institutions. The influence of Egyptian civilization on the development of early Christianity extends far beyond the obvious connections through biblical narratives and geographical proximity. Christian theological concepts, artistic traditions, and institutional structures drew heavily on Egyptian precedents, while adapting them to serve new spiritual purposes. The monastic movement that began in Egypt and spread throughout the Christian world applied Egyptian understanding of spiritual discipline and community organization to create new forms of religious life. Egyptian artistic techniques and symbolic systems were seamlessly integrated into early Christian art, creating visual languages that could communicate complex theological concepts to diverse audiences. The persistence of pharaonic artistic conventions in Coptic painting and sculpture demonstrates how deeply Egyptian aesthetic principles had penetrated cultural consciousness. Even as religious content changed, the underlying approaches to representing divine power, human dignity, and cosmic order remained recognizably Egyptian. The archaeological discoveries that continue to emerge from Egyptian sites provide ongoing revelations about the sophistication and complexity of ancient Egyptian civilization. Recent excavations have uncovered evidence of technological innovations, artistic achievements, and social developments that weren't previously known to scholars, forcing continuous revision of our understanding of Egyptian capabilities and accomplishments. The preservation of organic materials in Egypt's dry climate has created an archaeological record of extraordinary completeness that allows detailed reconstruction of ancient life in ways that aren't possible for most other ancient civilizations. The scientific analysis of Egyptian artifacts using modern techniques reveals manufacturing methods and material compositions that demonstrate remarkable technological sophistication. X-ray analysis of mummies provides information about ancient disease patterns, dietary habits, and medical practices that enhances our understanding of daily life in ancient Egypt. Chemical analysis of pigments, metals, and organic materials reveals trade relationships and technological knowledge that connected Egypt to commercial networks spanning continents. The digital preservation and analysis of Egyptian texts, artifacts, and architectural remains has created new opportunities for scholarly research while making ancient Egyptian civilization accessible to global audiences. Virtual reality reconstructions of ancient Egyptian buildings and landscapes allow modern visitors to experience spaces that haven't existed for thousands of years, while digital databases of hieroglyphic texts enable rapid searches and comparative analysis that would have taken earlier scholars decades to complete. The continuing influence of ancient Egyptian civilization on contemporary culture extends far beyond academic archaeology into areas of architecture, design, spirituality, and popular entertainment. Egyptian motifs and design principles continue to inspire modern architects and artists, while Egyptian religious and philosophical concepts influence contemporary spiritual movements and philosophical inquiry. The enduring fascination with Egyptian civilization reflects recognition that ancient Egypt achieved something rare in human history: a sustainable balance between individual fulfillment and collective prosperity that lasted for thousands of years. The lessons that contemporary societies can learn from ancient Egyptian civilization include the importance of long-term thinking, respect for natural cycles, investment in education and cultural development, and maintenance of social systems that provide opportunities for advancement based on merit rather than birth. Egyptian understanding of the relationship between individual achievement and community welfare offers insights that remain relevant for modern societies struggling to balance personal freedom with social responsibility. The ancient Egyptian achievement of maintaining cultural continuity while adapting to changing circumstances demonstrates that successful civilizations must be both conservative and innovative, preserving valuable traditions while remaining open to beneficial change. Their success in creating institutions that could survive political upheavals, foreign invasions, and natural disasters provides models for contemporary societies seeking to build resilient systems capable of weathering unpredictable challenges. As our gentle journey through ancient Egyptian civilization draws toward its close, we can appreciate how this remarkable culture created solutions to fundamental human challenges that remain relevant across the centuries. Their understanding that individual lives gain meaning through participation in larger purposes, that present actions influence future possibilities, and that human beings can create enduring beauty and wisdom through dedicated effort, continues to inspire and guide us in our own search for purpose and fulfillment. For purpose and fulfillment. The wisdom that flowed through Egyptian civilization, like the Nile itself, found perhaps its most profound expression in their understanding of death, not as an ending, but as transformation. This wasn't the primitive fear-based approach to mortality that characterized many ancient cultures, but a sophisticated philosophical framework that viewed death as the ultimate creative act, a process through which individual consciousness could transcend its temporary physical limitations to participate in eternal cosmic rhythms. The mummification practices that have captured modern imagination weren't expressions of morbid obsession with corpses, but rather sophisticated technologies designed to facilitate spiritual transformation. Egyptian embalmers understood that preserving the physical form was only the beginning of a complex process that required careful attention to both material and metaphysical dimensions. The removal and separate preservation of internal organs, the application of natron salts and aromatic resins, the intricate wrapping procedures that could take months to complete, all served specific functions in preparing the deceased for their journey through the afterlife realms. The canopic jars that held the preserved organs weren't merely storage containers, but sacred vessels that maintained the connection between physical and spiritual aspects of human identity. Each jar was protected by a different deity who specialized in safeguarding particular organs and their associated spiritual functions. The liver, stomach, lungs, and intestines weren't just biological structures, but repositories of memory, emotion, and spiritual energy that would be needed in the afterlife. The heart, considered the seat of consciousness and moral judgment, was left in the body or carefully replaced after preservation, ensuring that the deceased would retain their essential self throughout eternity. The elaborate burial chambers that house these transformed bodies were designed as functional spaces for afterlife existence rather than simple storage facilities. The wall paintings that covered tomb surfaces weren't decorative art, but magical technologies that created eternal realities through visual representation. Scenes of feasting, hunting, farming, and celebration didn't just commemorate past experiences, but actually provided those experiences for the deceased throughout eternity. The magical principle behind these images held that properly executed artistic representations could generate the realities they depicted. The servants shown working in tomb paintings weren't historical records, but magical employees who would continue performing their duties in the afterlife. The food offerings depicted on tomb walls would provide eternal nourishment, while the recreational activities shown would ensure permanent entertainment and fulfillment. This wasn't wishful thinking, but practical engineering of posthumous existence, using artistic techniques developed over centuries of experimentation and refinement. The books of the dead that were buried with Egyptian mummies provided detailed instruction manuals for navigating the complex spiritual geography of the afterlife. These weren't standardized texts, but customized guidebooks tailored to each individual's specific circumstances, profession, and spiritual needs. A scribe's book of the dead would include different spells and instructions than those prepared for a farmer, soldier, or priest, acknowledging that afterlife experiences would vary according to earthly roles and relationships. The spells contained in these texts weren't magical formulas in the fantasy sense, but rather sophisticated psychological and spiritual technologies designed to maintain consciousness and identity during the disorienting process of death and rebirth. They provided mantras for maintaining focus, visualizations for navigating unfamiliar environments, and passwords for gaining access to different spiritual realms. The deceased who mastered these techniques could retain their memories, personality, and relationships, while gaining new capabilities and perspectives unavailable to the living. The judgment scene that appears in many books of the dead represents perhaps the most sophisticated moral philosophy developed by any ancient civilization. The weighing of the heart against the feather of truth wasn't a crude system of divine punishment and reward, but a complex assessment of how well individuals had maintained harmony between their personal desires and cosmic order. The 42 declarations of innocence that the deceased recited before the divine tribunal addressed specific ethical principles that governed relationships between individuals and communities. These declarations weren't mere denials of wrongdoing, but positive affirmations of moral achievement that demonstrated understanding of Ma'at as a practical guide for daily living. The deceased declared not just that they hadn't stolen or murdered, but that they had given food to the hungry, water to the thirsty, and comfort to those who mourned. The judgment process evaluated both the absence of harmful actions and the presence of beneficial ones, creating a moral framework that emphasized active compassion rather than passive compliance. The divine judges who presided over this moral evaluation weren't arbitrary authorities, but embodiments of natural and social principles that governed cosmic order. Each judge represented a different aspect of ethical behavior, from honesty in commercial dealings to kindness toward animals, creating a comprehensive system that addressed every dimension of human responsibility. The successful completion of this judgment process didn't guarantee eternal bliss, but rather confirmed the deceased's readiness to participate constructively in the ongoing work of maintaining cosmic harmony. The afterlife realms that awaited the justified dead weren't heavenly rewards for good behavior, but continuing opportunities for growth, service, and creative expression. The field of reeds, often described as the Egyptian heaven, was actually an idealized version of the Nile Valley where the deceased could engage in perfected versions of the agricultural, artistic, and social activities they had enjoyed in life. This wasn't passive eternal rest, but active, eternal engagement with meaningful work and relationships. The solar journey that the deceased joined by becoming one of Ra's crew members represented the ultimate form of afterlife service, participating in the daily cycle that brought light and life to the world of the living. This wasn't just symbolic imagery, but literal description of how individual consciousness could contribute to cosmic processes that sustained all existence. The deceased who achieved this level of spiritual development became co-creators of reality, rather than merely beneficiaries of divine favor. The communication between living and dead that Egyptian religious practices maintained wasn't based on primitive ancestor worship, but on sophisticated understanding of consciousness as something that transcended physical death while remaining connected to ongoing earthly concerns. Families regularly brought food offerings to tomb chapels not because they believed the dead needed physical nourishment, but because these rituals maintained spiritual connections that benefited both the living and the deceased. The letters that Egyptians wrote to deceased relatives, asking for guidance and assistance with contemporary problems, weren't superstitious practices, but practical applications of belief in consciousness survival. The responses that people received through dreams, omens, and intuitive insights weren't imaginary, but real communications from individuals who retained their personalities and concern for family welfare despite their transformation into spiritual beings. The ancestor festivals that brought living family members together in cemetery celebrations weren't morbid gatherings, but joyful reunions that strengthened both family bonds and community connections. These occasions provided opportunities for sharing memories, renewing commitments, and receiving guidance from family members who possessed the expanded perspectives that came with afterlife experience. The food, drink, music, and dancing that characterized these festivals created festive atmospheres that celebrated continuity of relationships rather than mourning their interruption. The professional mourners who participated in Egyptian funeral ceremonies weren't theatrical performers, but trained facilitators who helped communities process grief while maintaining proper ritual procedures. Their elaborate displays of sorrow weren't artificial demonstrations, but authentic expressions of collective loss that acknowledged the genuine impact of death on social relationships. Their wailing and lamentation provided emotional outlets for feelings that might otherwise remain unexpressed, while their knowledge of proper procedures ensured that funerary rituals were performed correctly. The gradual evolution of Egyptian funerary practices over the millennia reflects a civilization that continued learning and developing more sophisticated approaches to death and afterlife preparation. The simple pit graves of pre-dynastic Egypt gave way to elaborate mastaba tombs, which evolved into the step pyramids and true pyramids of the Old Kingdom, which were succeeded by the rock-cut tombs of the New Kingdom and the elaborate temple complexes of the Ptolemaic period. Each development represented not just architectural innovation, but deeper understanding of the spiritual processes involved in death and transformation. The democratization of afterlife access that occurred during the Middle Kingdom represented one of the most significant social and spiritual developments in human history. The extension of resurrection privileges from pharaohs alone to anyone who could afford proper burial preparation created new forms of personal dignity and spiritual hope that influenced every aspect of Egyptian society. Common people who had previously faced death with resignation now approached it with anticipation of continued existence and spiritual development. The economic implications of this democratization were profound, as expanding markets for funerary goods and services supported entire industries of embalmers, tomb builders, artists, and ritual specialists. The middle-class tombs that proliferated during this period reveal families investing substantial portions of their resources in afterlife preparation, viewing these expenditures not as wasteful consumption, but as essential investments in eternal welfare. The quality and sophistication of middle-class burial equipment often rivaled that of earlier royal tombs, demonstrating how spiritual democratization had created new standards of posthumous dignity. The international influence of Egyptian funerary practices extended throughout the ancient world, as foreign visitors observed Egyptian approaches to death and dying with fascination and respect. Greek and Roman accounts of Egyptian mummification and burial customs reveal deep admiration for Egyptian understanding of consciousness, survival, and spiritual transformation. The adoption of Egyptian funerary techniques and burial goods by neighboring cultures demonstrates recognition that Egyptian approaches to death represented superior wisdom about fundamental human concerns. The preservation of Egyptian mummies in museums throughout the modern world has created unique opportunities for scientific study of ancient health, diet, disease patterns, and genetic relationships that wouldn't be possible without Egyptian preservation techniques. The information gained through medical examination of mummies has revolutionized understanding of ancient demographics, nutrition, and pathology, while providing insights into Egyptian medical knowledge and therapeutic practices. The ethical questions raised by museum display of Egyptian mummies reflect contemporary struggles to balance scientific inquiry with respect for ancient beliefs and cultural sensitivities. The debates about repatriation of Egyptian artifacts and human remains have forced modern societies to confront fundamental questions about cultural ownership, religious respect, and the responsibilities that come with preserving ancient heritage for future generations. The continuing fascination with Egyptian approaches to death and afterlife reflects universal human concerns about mortality, consciousness, and the possibility of existence beyond physical death. The sophistication of Egyptian death-related beliefs and practices offers alternatives to contemporary approaches that often avoid confronting death directly or reduce it to purely biological processes. Egyptian understanding of death as transformation rather than termination provides frameworks for approaching mortality that emphasize growth, continuity, and hope rather than fear and finality. The therapeutic applications of Egyptian death wisdom include approaches to grief counseling, terminal illness care, and bereavement support that acknowledge spiritual dimensions of human experience while providing practical guidance for navigating loss and transformation. The Egyptian understanding that death represents a continuation of relationships rather than their termination offers comfort to bereaved individuals, while encouraging ongoing connection with deceased loved ones through memory, ritual, and spiritual practice. The philosophical implications of Egyptian death beliefs extend beyond individual concerns to encompass questions about the nature of consciousness, the relationship between mind and body, and the possibility of survival beyond physical existence that remains central to contemporary scientific and philosophical inquiry. Egyptian insights about consciousness as something that transcends physical death, while remaining connected to ongoing earthly relationships, provide perspectives that complement rather than contradict modern understanding of brain function and mental processes. The artistic legacy of Egyptian funerary culture continues to influence contemporary approaches to memorial design, cemetery planning, and commemorative art that seeks to honor deceased individuals while providing comfort and inspiration to survivors. The Egyptian integration of practical function with symbolic meaning in tomb architecture and decoration offers models for creating memorial spaces that serve both emotional and spiritual needs of grieving communities. The spiritual teachings embedded in Egyptian funerary literature continue to provide guidance for individuals seeking to understand death, prepare for their own mortality, and maintain relationships with deceased loved ones. The practical wisdom contained in these ancient texts addresses timeless concerns about how to live meaningful lives, face death with dignity, and maintain hope in the face of loss and uncertainty. As our gentle exploration of this remarkable civilization approaches its peaceful conclusion, we can see how Egyptian wisdom about death and transformation illuminates broader questions about the meaning and purpose of human existence. Their understanding that individual lives gain significance through participation in eternal processes, that present actions influence future possibilities, and that consciousness can transcend physical limitations while remaining connected to ongoing earthly concerns, offers perspectives that remain profoundly relevant for contemporary seekers of wisdom and meaning. The ancient Egyptians achieved something remarkable in human history. They created a civilization that faced mortality, not with denial or despair, but with confidence and preparation, viewing death as the ultimate adventure rather than the final defeat. Their legacy reminds us that approaching life's greatest mystery with wisdom, courage, and hope can transform not only our understanding of death, but our appreciation of life itself, helping us discover depths of meaning and possibility that remain available to all who seek them with sincere hearts and open minds. Sincere hearts and open minds. And in the quiet twilight of Egyptian civilization, as the last native pharaohs watched Roman legions march through streets that had witnessed 3,000 years of unbroken tradition, something extraordinary was happening that would ensure Egypt's immortality in ways its rulers could never have imagined. The scribes, working in temple scriptoriums, weren't just copying ancient texts anymore. They were translating the accumulated wisdom of millennia into Greek, Latin, and emerging Christian languages, creating bridges that would carry Egyptian insights across cultural boundaries that seemed insurmountable. These weren't desperate attempts to preserve a dying culture, but confident expressions of intellectual tradition that understood its own enduring value. The Egyptian scholars who worked alongside Greek philosophers in Alexandria's great library weren't abandoning their heritage, but sharing it with colleagues who recognized its sophistication and relevance. The mathematical treatises, medical texts, and astronomical observations that emerged from these collaborations combined Egyptian empirical knowledge with Greek theoretical frameworks, creating syntheses that advanced human understanding in ways neither tradition could have achieved alone. The Christian monasteries that began appearing throughout Egypt during the 3rd and 4th centuries provided unexpected sanctuaries for preserving pharaonic wisdom that might otherwise have been lost during periods of political upheaval. Coptic monks who had devoted their lives to Christian contemplation found themselves becoming custodians of ancient Egyptian texts that contained insights about human nature, spiritual development, and the relationship between earthly and divine realms that complemented rather than contradicted their new religious understanding. The hieroglyphic inscriptions that covered temple walls weren't just historical curiosities to these monastic preservers, but living documents that contained practical wisdom about agriculture, medicine, astronomy, and ethical living that remained valuable regardless of changing religious contexts. The careful copying and translation work undertaken in these monasteries created manuscripts that would survive the destruction of original temples, while ensuring that Egyptian knowledge remained accessible to future generations of seekers and scholars. The Islamic conquest that brought Arab rule to Egypt in the 7th century introduced yet another cultural layer to the complex tapestry of Egyptian civilization. But rather than destroying existing traditions, the new rulers showed remarkable respect for indigenous knowledge systems that had proven their value over centuries of practical application. Arab scholars who established research centers in Cairo and Fustat actively sought out Egyptian texts on mathematics, medicine, and natural philosophy, recognizing that ancient wisdom could enhance their own intellectual pursuits. The translation movement that flourished under early Islamic rule created Arabic versions of Egyptian scientific and philosophical works that would eventually reach medieval European universities through Spain and Sicily, carrying Egyptian insights into the heart of developing Western civilization. The algebraic techniques, geometric principles, and astronomical observations that had been developed along the Nile found new applications in Baghdad, Cordoba, and Paris, demonstrating how intellectual traditions could transcend political and religious boundaries to serve universal human needs. The medical knowledge that Egyptian physicians had accumulated through millennia of systematic observation and experimentation proved particularly valuable to Islamic scholars who were working to establish comprehensive healthcare systems throughout their expanding empire. Egyptian surgical techniques, pharmaceutical preparations, and diagnostic procedures were carefully studied and adapted, creating medical traditions that combined ancient wisdom with contemporary innovations in ways that advanced healing arts throughout the medieval world. The architectural principles that had guided Egyptian temple construction for thousands of years influenced Islamic builders who were creating new forms of religious architecture that needed to accommodate different ritual requirements while maintaining the spiritual power and aesthetic sophistication that characterize sacred spaces. The mathematical relationships, proportional systems, and construction techniques developed by Egyptian architects provided foundations for innovations that would culminate in the great mosques and madrasas that adorned medieval Islamic cities. And so our gentle voyage through the shifting sands of time comes to its peaceful close, friend. We have walked together through 3,000 years of extraordinary human achievement. From those first farming villages beside the life-giving Nile, to the great temples where ancient wisdom found its final flowering. The voices that called to us from hieroglyphic inscriptions and painted tomb walls have shared their stories of love and loss, triumph and transformation, reminding us that across all the centuries that separate us, the human heart remains unchanging in its deepest longings and highest aspirations. May their timeless wisdom guide your dreams tonight, and may you wake tomorrow with a deeper appreciation for the remarkable journey that connects all of us to the eternal flow of hum and story. Sweet dreams, and thank you for traveling with me through the wonder that was ancient Egypt.